The name of the uncontrollable swordmaster, confined within 4 walls, was infamous. And thanks to his imprisonment, the guy went completely mad in there. Gislen Berdium was also considered his father's useless eldest son. Yet, the strongest knight of the north was defeated by that very same Gislen. The man admitted he'd spent a fortune setting a trap for him. As everything went up in flames, Gislen walked slowly toward his victim and asked the man if he liked the spot. Outraged, the knight asked Gislen if he'd known everything from the start. But the man calmly replied that he knew even more than that. He also knew how many enemies would arrive, who they were, and that he'd sent help to the knight. In other words, he knew absolutely everything from the very beginning. But the knight couldn't believe it, because he always had an ace up his sleeve. That's why he couldn't admit that someone as talentless as Gislen could beat him. But Gislen didn't want to hear it. So he just kicked him, shoving the man down to the ground. He told him to shut his mouth, taking off his helmet. Gislen said it didn't matter how many raids they launched. He would win the war. He said the reason for his victories was that he knew everything beforehand. It all started 1 year ago in the kingdom of Ludania. Upon waking up, Gislen nervously began examining his body, breathing heavily. The boy couldn't believe he was alive, mostly because he remembered exactly what had happened just moments ago. With a sharp, ringing sound, Gislen's sword had plunged into the ground. Bleeding and exhausted, the boy cursed under his breath, and immediately after, he was struck down. When the boy hit the ground, the swordsman said his end had finally come. The noble swordsman, Idun, told Gislen that the war was over. When asked for his final words, he only said he regretted never getting his revenge. And in the end, Idun wished for his death. The boy chuckled and said Gislen was very arrogant. Suddenly, he asked Gislen about the boy who abandoned his family after his sister's death. Gislen simply asked Idun how he knew about that. The man admitted he was exhausted from tracking down Gislen's past and confessed that they were working in collusion with the Dolphin family to overthrow Gislen's family. Hearing this, Gislen was shocked. He was shocked to realize it wasn't just Dolphin's men behind that incident. Idun decided the conversation was pointless, since Gislen was going to die soon anyway, as if he'd gone mad. Gislen screamed that he would never forgive Idun for this. But the guy just narrowed his eyes and smirked. And then, swinging his sword, he easily severed Gislen's head. Shocked by what had happened, Gislen continued examining himself. Still alive, he thought it was some kind of hallucination, especially since he looked younger. Looking back, he also assumed he might have been handed over to wizards for experiments. And this was all part of the test. Suddenly, someone entered the tent, and Gislen heard a voice. The knight who entered, Ricardo, told the boy to come out since everyone knew Gislen was awake. But when a sword was suddenly at his throat, the knight froze in fear. Gislen told the knight he'd stay alive if he obediently answered his questions. However, he warned him that he might change his mind. The knight didn't understand what had suddenly gotten into the man. But then he let out a deep sigh and said this was too much. Gislen didn't understand the reaction, because he was seriously threatening him. Breaking free, Ricardo said Gislen had tired everyone out with his hysteria. He was surprised at how the guy had forgotten his tantrum about not being allowed to lead the squad to clear out the orcs. Hearing this, Gislen felt lost. He thought it was nonsense. But the knight told the boy to come to his senses, because a lot of people were waiting for him. Suddenly, Gislen asked where they were going, and Ricardo answered that they were heading to the Berdium mansion. Hearing this, Gislen was shocked and abruptly stopped Ricardo. He demanded that he repeat it. Gislen asked if he meant that same ruined mansion. Soon, Gislen went out and climbed the hill. However, he didn't understand why the mansion was intact, since he'd personally witnessed its fall. Ricardo asked if Gislen was having nightmares, since calling his own home destroyed was a bit much. Pinching his cheek hard, Gislen thought he was still asleep. But, because of the intense pain, he realized it was unlikely to be a dream. He looked younger, and the mansion was still standing. It gave him the idea that he had actually returned to the past. Gislen remembered that when he was younger, everything in the mansion irritated him. Because of his immaturity, he often created problems for everyone, which caused many in the mansion to distance themselves from him. Unable to handle the criticism, the boy ran away from home and became a mercenary a few years later. He survived many battles and made a name for himself. He decided to return to his homeland to fix the mistakes of the past. But he found only ruins. In that moment, he had lost everything. But now, the mansion was intact, and the people he loved were there, too. The boy couldn't believe it. But inside, he was bursting with joy. Still, Gislen understood it was too soon to celebrate. Looking at Ricardo, the boy suddenly realized he could never forget this day. After all, this was the day most of the expedition members had died. In his past life, Gislen was part of a squad that was told there would only be 3 orcs at the site. But when they arrived, it turned out there were at least 20, and because of Gislen's stubborn desire to become a commander, many of his own men died. But now Gislen understood the task was doable, because orcs didn't know a thing about tactics. As soon as he thought this, he heard a loud, sharp sound behind him. Then he saw one of the buildings flying over him and crashing down right in front. At that moment, all the knights started screaming that it was orcs. The furious orcs were already charging toward them. Gislen spun around, shocked, because the last time, the orcs hadn't attacked like this. While he was thinking, the orcs had already started destroying everything and attacking indiscriminately. Suddenly, the cleanup commander appeared and told everyone to take their positions. But as soon as he got close, one of the orcs attacked Escoban. The man realized the sudden attack had caught everyone off guard. But a strange voice cut right through his thoughts. Turns out, they were trying to warn him about the danger right behind him. Reacting way faster than the commander, the kid lunged forward. By the time he got close, the man just turned around, shoving Scoban aside. Gislen braced himself to fight the orc. The man frowned, totally confused. He never expected Gislen to jump into the fray that fast. With one swing of his sword, it looked like Gislen could slice the orc's arm off without even trying. Everyone stared, shocked by the kid's strength, bleeding out, missing an arm and a leg. The orc screamed in agony. It couldn't stand anymore and collapsed onto its back, brandishing his blade. Gislen realized he still couldn't access his mana. He walked over to Scoban, asked if he was the commander, and then demanded he hand over control. The man stared at Gislen, having no clue what he was talking about, until Gislen added that he wanted to take command. For a moment, the man just sat there on the ground. He thought it was insane to demand command when human lives were on the line. He stood up and said no way. He explained that even if Gislen was the Count's son, they couldn't just hand him power like that. Gislen got annoyed, but he had to admit, if he were in Scoban's shoes, he would have done the same thing. Suddenly, another orc appeared right in front of them. Scoban told the kid to get to a shelter and said he'd handle the rest himself, since Gislen didn't have any experience anyway. Preparing to attack, Gislen said he didn't have a choice. Reacting on instinct, the man managed to dodge the sword flying towards him, grabbing Gislen by his clothes. He angrily asked what the hell that was, but then he heard a sharp sound and turned his head. Turns out, Gislen's sword had struck the orc right in the skull. The orc's eyes rolled back from the intense pain, and a trickle of blood ran down its face. A second later, its lifeless body hit the ground. Scoban was shocked that Gislen managed to hit the weak point so perfectly. Suddenly, Gislen asked if Scoban knew what the most important thing in battle was. While they were talking, a swarm of orcs was closing in on the terrified soldiers. Gislen said that as long as his soldiers were shaking with fear, they'd never win, which meant they needed a push. With those words, he lunged forward, yanking the sword out of the orc's head at the same time. He took a running start, leaped high into the air, and found himself right above the orcs. He landed on one of them and dealt a fatal blow right in front of everyone. Skoban watched, stunned. Gislen pulled the blood-stained sword from the orc's head and taunted them all to attack him, claiming he'd beat every single one of them. The next moment, he charged at the enraged orcs, weaving through them with ease. He dealt deadly wounds and kept moving forward, watching the orc body parts go flying. Skoban wondered if he was dreaming. Skoban had mana, but unlike Gislen, he couldn't do anything against the orcs. But then, he realized Gislen was already exhausted. Watching the kid, Skoban noticed Gislen was using minimal movements to dodge attacks, only landing precise hits on their weak points. Gislen looked like a swordmaster who just couldn't use mana. Suddenly, Skoban thought he might be looking at a true genius. As he kept fighting, Gislen shouted that he hadn't even warmed up yet. While backing away from the orcs, he taunted them, saying they weren't living up to their warrior reputation. Everyone was surprised that the orcs were only chasing Gislen. They all looked to Skoban, waiting for his orders. He looked down, wondering what Gislen was thinking. The attack and drawing their attention was good, but now he was running away, and it looked like there was a cliff in that direction. Thinking it over, Skoban started to figure out what Gislen had in mind. Still, it was hard to accept such a dangerous plan. Turning sharply, he ordered the soldiers to raise their shields and form a wall, adding that they were going after Gislen. Meanwhile, the kid ran from the orcs as fast as he could. He hoped Skoban understood the plan, since he was an experienced commander. Even though he wanted to wipe out all the orcs, he just didn't have the stamina. But he still trusted they could take them on. When the orcs caught up to the kid, a stomping sound echoed from behind them. The noise made the orcs start to turn around. That's when they saw the soldiers behind them, forming a wall with their spears held high. Gislen chuckled and said it was perfect. With that, he jumped off the cliff and told the soldiers to make their move. At the same time, Skoban gave the order to attack. All the soldiers rushed the remaining orcs. With no time to react, the orcs started backing closer to the cliff. The soldiers did everything they could to push the orcs back, and in the end, they managed it without a single casualty, falling to their doom. The orcs growled in frustration. When it was all over, the soldiers finally breathed a sigh of relief. Remembering Gislen, Skoban leaned over the edge of the cliff. Turns out, the kid had stabbed his sword into the rock and managed to hang on. Gislen looked up at Skoban and smiled. Seeing that look, Skoban was confused at first, but then a smile spread across his face. He reached out his hand and told the kid to grab it. But Gislen didn't have any strength left. His grip on the sword slipped, and he started plummeting down the cliff. Everyone watched in horror as the boy fell. While he was out cold, Gislen heard a familiar voice. Seeing Elena in front of him, he was stunned. His sister was grieving their mother's death, but Gislen was there, trying to support her. But over time, something changed, and Elena started saying Gislen was the worst. All these memories flashed before Gislen in an instant. He quickly realized these were memories of his sister. But suddenly, someone grabbed his shoulder. With tears in her eyes, Elena asked him to come with her. After that, he suddenly woke up. Turns out, he was lying in a bed in the middle of a room. After checking his body, he concluded he was still alive. He stood up, wondering if it had been a dream. But the moment he rose, intense pain shot through his whole body. The boy realized this was the aftermath of that day. But he was just glad to be alive. Suddenly, the door opened and someone walked into the room. The maid who entered was overjoyed that the boy had regained consciousness. But seeing Belinda, Gislen froze in shock. The girl said she was so worried and that he should have left the orcs to the soldiers. But he cut her rambling short by rushing over and hugging her tight. Taken aback, the girl asked if she had done something wrong. Belinda had been Gislen's personal tutor and the only one who tolerated his antics until the very end. But after his family fell, the girl was never found, and he never saw her again. She didn't understand why he was so happy to see her, since they saw each other every day. Gislen felt he had to tell her the truth. He said seriously that a misfortune would soon befall the mansion. And the girl looked surprised. But he also wanted to tell her the most important thing. Gislen said he had come back to life after death. Belinda just agreed that the orcs had dealt him a hard blow, and then she asked the man if he knew the misfortune would fall on him, and not the mansion. Then she started scolding the boy for his recklessness. But he didn't look surprised. Belinda asked what would happen if he couldn't even go to the festival because of his injuries. Hearing this, the boy froze. Belinda reminded him that Elena was looking forward to the day Gislen would take her to the festival. And the maid thought this was a good chance to get close again. Then, Gislen remembered that a festival was held at this time of year. In the past, due to his circumstances, he hadn't been able to enjoy the festival with her. When he asked when the festival was, the girl replied it would be in about a week. Hearing this, the boy fell into thought. Suddenly, someone else entered the room, turning around at the familiar voice. Gislen looked confused. His whole life, he had been tormented by memories he couldn't leave behind. And in 1 week, his sister was supposed to die. Seeing his sister, Gislen ran to her and hugged her tight. Seeing this, Belinda was surprised. Elena was also shocked, thinking her brother was playing a prank. But Gislen just said he missed her so much. The girl pushed the boy away hard and said he was scaring her. Feeling the pain from the shove, Gislen wondered if she had always been that strong. Sighing, Elena said that wouldn't change what had happened between them. But Gislen didn't understand what she meant. It turned out, Gislen had said a lot of nasty things to his sister recently. Elena was still offended by this. But Gislen was just surprised. They hadn't been close in the past. Realizing he was wrong, Gislen apologized. Surprised, the girls thought all this was a result of the skirmish with the orcs. But Gislen said it was he who defeated them, not the other way around. His shouting was interrupted by a sharp pain throughout his body. Observing him, Elena said that was probably why he was dragged back to the mansion unconscious. As soon as she said this, the girls laughed good-naturedly. For a moment, Gislen watched them calmly, then smiled, because the people in front of him were the same ones he remembered. In the past, he refused to go to the festival, claiming a failed trip. That was when he saw his sister for the last time. Later, she was found in pieces, along with the bodies of her bodyguards. Gislen blamed himself for not being with her at that moment. Suddenly, someone knocked on the door. Then, 2 guards appeared looking for Elena. They apologized for their arrival and informed her that the servants had asked Elena to evaluate the preparations for the festival. Gislen asked why they asked Elena this. Belinda explained that due to the shortage of workers, even Elena sometimes had to work. As he watched his sister, he thought that at the time, it hadn't bothered him, which was probably why he didn't know. Suddenly, he offered his help. Hearing this, Elena turned to him in surprise. Then, the girls were once again convinced that Gislen had received a strong blow to the head. When they went out, it was very noisy. Elena rejected Gislen's help because no one wanted to work in his presence. Gislen thought that Elena's body would be found far from the festival, which meant someone had dragged her there. And to prevent this, he needed to find all the entrances and exits of the castle. Suddenly, the voice of someone approaching was heard. When Gislen saw the man, he recognized him immediately. Standing in front of him was a breathless old man. Fergus. The old man said he came immediately when he heard what happened with the detachment. Elena said Gislen was acting strangely, so Fergus should come get the boy. Gislen had to resign himself to the fact that he would have to gather information slowly. Afterward, he asked the old man to take him to an abandoned training ground. When asked why, the boy answered calmly that he was going to train. Fergus was surprised to hear this. When he took the boy to the right place, Gislen was surprised. It turned out the site was better than he imagined. It was a suitable place for his training, one he hadn't found in his years as a mercenary. The old man said they were monitoring the preparations of the place, because Fergus trusted that Gislen's difficulties would be resolved with time. Suddenly, Gislen realized that Fergus had been like this in his past life. Thinking about this, the boy got depressed. He replied that he wanted to live a long life and that death was not for him, which made Fergus feel as if the boy had already experienced death. Gislen replied sarcastically that he had indeed died and then been reborn. When Fergus thought it was a joke, Gislen said goodbye to him. Gislen reflected on how he had always been hostile toward those around him. But in reality, he was simply blind. But now he knew he had 1 week before everything started to crumble. They discovered that one of the neighboring lords was behind Elena's death. And because of this, Berdium got involved in a war that they lost. Gislen knew that Elena's death was. It was the starting point of everything. So he decided to set things right. Step 1, fix his body. Even if time wasn't on his side, still, Gislen was hell-bent on opening his mana circuits. Mana. That supernatural force, letting humans shatter their limits, unleashing and storing it was supposed to be a grueling task. Yet Gislen could pull it off even in the heat of battle. All he had to do was sense the mana particles and force them into a single point. For a man who had survived tens of thousands of battles, forging a mana core was child's play. But that wasn't the only reason Gislen became one of the strongest. It was also thanks to a technique he'd read in a certain book he found. Because of that, he could forge multiple mana cores. 3 of them, all linked together. It should have helped him regain his lost power. But Gislen's current body couldn't handle the strain. In his past life, he could sustain 5 cores. Right now, only 3. This method allowed for explosive power growth. But the cost was a massive amount of mana. That was exactly why Gislen lost to Idun before the bastard attacked him right when he ran dry. The technique wasn't exactly reliable. But for now, it would have to be enough for Gislen. He was young again. He had time. And he was absolutely determined to take Idun's head. Along with the Dolphin family and their lackeys, Gislen was going to destroy every last one of them. 1 week later, the festival began. Gislen showed up armed to the teeth. Elena was shocked when she saw him. It felt weird seeing her brother at an event like this for the first time. But as the family representative, he had no choice. Elena noticed the change in him. She knew he'd been training non-stop all week. He asked what was wrong with the heir to the family training, and Elena reminded him that he used to say the exact opposite. Gislen was surprised to hear she wanted to become the lord without any ceremony. Elena just smiled, saying his changes only made her happy. It even felt like the old Gislen had returned. Hearing that, he was taken aback and fell silent. Actually, he'd realized something this week. Because his behavior had changed, the present and the future were starting to shift. Major events probably wouldn't change much. But he couldn't predict how his actions would ripple out into the smaller details. He had to use his knowledge of the future to craft the most effective plan for every situation. He was ready for whatever was coming next. He spent the whole afternoon walking with Elena while she sampled the street food. Most of the time, he just followed wherever his sister dragged him. Elena loved every bit of it, even if the festival had gotten boring after all these years. Meanwhile, Gislen was deep in thought. Nothing bad had happened yet. Even though the festival was winding down, suddenly, he heard voices. Knights approached them. They claimed there was some new entertainment nearby. Elena agreed to go, hoping for some fun. And in that moment, Gislen realized exactly who was pulling the strings. Turns out, his family had been raising snakes. Philip and Jamal. People Elena trusted unconditionally because they'd protected her since birth. The knights led Elena to the spot they mentioned. But there was absolutely nothing there. Elena was confused. How could anyone have fun in such a miserable place? Jamal asked them to wait, promising everyone would arrive soon. But Elena was indignant. No one would come to a dump like this. Ignoring them, Gislen was lost in his own calculations. At first glance, it looked like a normal alley. But the escape routes were blocked. His thoughts were cut short by his sister's sudden voice. Jamal asked Elena to wait, but she grabbed Gislen, ready to leave. He was surprised by her grip strength. Since Elena was looking at Gislen, she didn't see the figure blocking her path and crashed right into him. Philip asked Elena to wait a little longer, but seeing the unnatural look on his face, she got scared. She told the knights that they were acting strange and asked what was wrong. Jamal told her they didn't mean to scare her, then added that they were just following orders. Hearing that, Elena started to panic. Just then, another figure appeared ahead, flanked by two others with their faces hidden. When Frank arrived, he noted the job was clean. As expected, Jamal replied that they'd done what was asked, so the deal better be worth it. But then, Frank turned his attention to the boy standing next to Elena. He immediately recognized Gislen. He said he hadn't given orders regarding him. Jamal claimed Gislen was just a bonus since he tagged along. Gislen cut into the conversation, asking Jamal why he thought he could trade them so easily. The knight told Gislen to worry about himself, bragging that they'd be running far away. He admitted they were sick of these impoverished lands. He knew everyone was fleeing this place anyway. Gislen was done listening to the traitor. He decided to attack, using the element of surprise. Blood sprayed from Jamal's mouth and from the wound. Jamal only let out a strangled cough. Everyone else was stunned by the sudden attack. As the traitor's body split in two, Gislen remarked that at least the others hadn't traded human lives. He turned to Philip, terrified. The knight grabbed Elena and went to draw his weapon, but Gislen struck first, instantly killing the enemy. Before he died, he managed to gasp that this was unthinkable. Then his lifeless body hit the ground. The other bandits started muttering about how the eldest Berdium's son wasn't even supposed to have trained. However, their leader was certain that it was Gislen, standing right in front of them. The two knights were distracted, but the guy's attacks were still impressive. Trembling with fear, Elena asked what was happening, but Gislen didn't answer her. With a sharp movement, he simply decided to knock his sister unconscious. He caught her, then slowly lowered Elena to the ground. When they thanked him for doing the dirty work, Gislen just turned around. The guy said they wanted to get rid of the knights anyway, adding that Gislen was different from the rumors. The bandit hinted that Gislen was hiding his true skills on purpose. Gislen drew his blade, asking what it mattered to them. Gripping his sword, he figured there were only 3 opponents. The 2 in the back, no threat. But the leader, he was leaking a lot of mana. That's why Gislen decided he needed to deal with him fast. Before that, he asked who gave the order, but the thief just shot back that dead men didn't need to know. Gislen wasn't surprised by the answer, but he made up his mind right then he was gonna make this thief talk. The man ordered his crew to take the kid alive, but to break his limbs first, make him go crazy from the helplessness. Grinning, the man said that to create a masterpiece, you gotta learn a lesson in pain. Upon hearing the order, the 2 thieves lunged forward, but Gislen stood there, calm, readying his swing. As the thieves rushed him, he tossed something their way. The thief recognized the firecracker immediately, but while he was staring at it, bam, he took a hit to the face. After slicing the firecracker, Gislen buried his sword right into the thief's face. Meanwhile, the other one came at the boy from the side. He tried to strike, but the guy managed to block the hit. When the blade stopped, Gislen twisted his arm, grabbing the sword, then spun around and took him out. In that same second, he swung his own blade and took the thief's head clean off. Mid-attack, he heard a whistling sound from above. With his men dead, the leader decided it was time to join the fight. Reacting to the approach, Gislen blocked that strike too. The man couldn't understand How did the kid block a hit coming from his blind spot? Spinning around, Gislen readied his attack, thrown off by his own confusion. The man missed the strike aimed at his neck. He had a cut on his neck, and his smoking pipe was sliced in two. But the man's sword kept moving. Sensing the danger, the boy blocked the blow. That's when the man recognized Gislen's strength. If he didn't have mana, he would have lost his head already. Gislen figured the man must have concentrated his mana around himself to avoid serious damage. The thief didn't know where a kid got skills like that at such a young age. But he promised Gislen would die right there. At that moment, mana started glowing around the man. As he attacked, he said Gislen couldn't win with such tiny mana reserves. With excitement in his eyes, he pictured exactly how he was going to kill the kid. But as soon as he said it, a smile crept onto Gislen's face. Seeing that, the man was shocked. In that split second, the boy dodged, slipping past the enemy's sword, and, using the enemy's confusion, he kicked, taking the hit. The thief jumped back several meters. Despite everything, he just kept thinking Gislen couldn't win with his mana reserves. But the second he finished talking, blood spurted from his throat. Intense pain dropped the man to his knees. Coughing, the boy's hit wasn't hard. But the man realized Gislen had broken his enchantment. Walking up to the man, Gislen said he never thought there was such a conspiracy behind his sister's death. And now that he knew who was behind it, he was pissed. Gislen was ready to kill the man on the spot. Feeling an unexpected surge of mana, the thief was shocked by it. But his thoughts were cut short when the boy suddenly rushed him. The man had to admit his opponent was fast, but he managed to defend against Gislen's attacks. So the fight went on. At one point, Gislen unleashed a powerful swing, striking the thief's blade with all his might using two swords. The man's hands were shaking. Even though he was just blocking, his sword started to crack. Slowly. He'd never seen anyone release mana in such huge amounts before. It was like Gislen had suddenly turned into a completely different person. With another blow, Gislen finally shattered the man's sword completely. With nothing to block the attack, the thief took a fatal hit. Instantly, blood gushed from the massive wound. But that wasn't enough for Gislen. He readied another attack. Then he buried his sword into the now helpless thief. The man felt intense pain as his body was pierced. But Gislen clamped a hand around his throat and shoved him back. Then, he invited the man to continue their little chat. Without moving, Gislen asked who ordered the hit. But the thief wasn't giving up that easily. He decided to use a hidden knife. Actually, his target was Gislen, not the helpless, sleeping Elena. But he decided to at least take her to the grave with him. He went to throw the dagger, but his hand suddenly froze, binding the man with a spell. Gislen offered him a deal. He promised to pull the sword out if the man didn't do anything stupid and answered his questions. The thief realized immediately that the threads were made of mana, but he had no clue when Gislen managed to create them. In fact, Gislen had prepared this spell from the start. Gripping the sword in his hand, the man said a warrior like him could surely lick his own wounds. But the boy knew it would all be over if his mana core was destroyed. Hearing that, the thief tensed up. Right then, he felt a sharp pain, and a huge crack started to appear on his body. What scared him was that his mana, it was starting to fade away. The man said one wrong move would cause the mana to destroy everything there. Gislen just shot back that only amateurs would die. But he could handle it. That's when the man realized the kid wasn't lying. Looking into Gislen's eyes, he knew he was really going to die. Terrified, he betrayed the Count who ordered Elena's death. He explained that this was how Count Desmond wanted to start a war. After hearing him out, Gislen didn't show any reaction. In his past life, all the dirty work fell on the families allied with the Duke. Gislen asked if that's why they needed Elena, and the man confirmed it. Hearing the answer, Gislen drove the sword deeper. The man coughed and asked why Gislen had broken the deal. Gislen chuckled, saying the thief had killed many. But right before dying, he turned into a coward. But the guy was surprised when he heard laughter in response. The man claimed his death wouldn't change anything and the problem with the degrads was already solved. But Gislen silenced the thief by force and decided to explain something. Gislen chuckled and said he had been reborn after death. And this time, everything would be different. As soon as he finished speaking, he made the man feel intense pain again. As he said, the mana exploded. But Gislen remained intact, breathing heavily. Gislen turned to the side. Then he saw Elena, who was fast asleep on the floor, throwing down his sword. The man threw his head back and exhaled deeply. But at that very moment, he felt blood rising in his throat. Gislen fell to his knees and vomited. The boy cursed because his strength hadn't caused such a reaction in the past. Staring at the door in front of him, he said he wouldn't give up so easily anyway. Bursting inside, he saw a massacre and another body. Gislen came there because he knew about this corpse. And if the thief's words were true, Gislen knew whose body it was. Before him lay the son of Degrad. After examining the bodies, the man concluded that everyone had been murdered, and they would accuse him of being Elena's killer. However, once the death of these people was revealed, war would come. So, Gislen decided to get rid of the evidence. After burning the building, Gislen took his sister and left. However, as they were leaving, someone was watching them and immediately decided to report everything. Soon, everyone knew the mission had failed. The thieves faced a lot of insults. But the spy tried to justify himself. He explained that Gislen himself had prevented them from killing Elena. Hearing that name, everyone thought that guy was a useless idiot. Suddenly, someone said everyone knows what Gislen is like. So that argument didn't hold water. The spy objected, saying the guy wasn't at all like they said. The rumors were completely different from reality. The spy actually thought there was someone else inside the boy's body. He immediately changed the subject, turning to the degrads, and said it wouldn't be difficult to start a territorial war now. The spy asked for another chance, but everyone considered him helpless and decided to get rid of him. Suddenly, an authoritative voice spoke up, interrupting everyone. The man asked what kind of chance the thief needed, then promised he would get rid of Gislen. He said he would fight that guy personally because he had a trump card. Hearing this, everyone involuntarily got interested. They were talking about Cain Lagodes, who was famous for his sword-fighting techniques. And since Cain was Gislen's cousin, pitting the two boys against each other wouldn't be difficult. Hearing this, everyone was surprised but remained silent. Only the one with the most power decided to speak. The man warned that if the thief failed again, there wouldn't be another chance. Arriving at the training hall, Fergus wanted to invite the boy to lunch. But suddenly the old man saw a bright light in front of him. A sudden light appeared, wrapping around the sword leaning against the wall, and then started pulling the sword deeper into the training hall. Gislen was able to intercept the sword without any difficulty. The boy swung it and concluded it wasn't bad. Only then did he realize someone had entered the room. Fergus apologized to the boy for interrupting his training, but suddenly asked Gislen how he did that. After asking what exactly Fergus was talking about, Gislen demonstrated his skill again. He explained that mana threads allowed him to use mana as a pulling force. He had used it many times in the past, but now he had to use all his strength just to use the threads. But if Gislen used only one thread and saved mana, then he could reach the same level. Fergus said he believed he was well versed in the knowledge of mana training, but he had never seen anything like this. But he thought about how Gislen hadn't used mana at all lately, and now had come up with such amazing uses for it. But then he remembered he had something to tell Gislen. Fergus bowed and thanked the boy for saving Elena, but the boy said he just did what he had to do. Elena admitted that no one believed her when she said Gislen saved her, so she asked her brother to tell everyone. But he refused. Belinda was angry that the two knights had done that. but she thought they had been strange from the start. Gislen knew Elena was hiding a lot of things, but he was glad to have at least stalled the war for a while. Gislen couldn't stop it alone, so he needed an army. At that moment, a maid entered the room and brought food. Meanwhile, Gislen was thinking that to get an army, he needed more power. But his thoughts were interrupted when a piece of bread was placed in front of him. At first, Gislen stared silently at the piece of bread. Then he decided to ask Belinda if they had really given them dessert immediately, but the girl reminded him that their region was poor. At that moment, a loud voice was heard demanding compensation. A man in the street demanded compensation for damages caused by the cancellation of the festival. However, he didn't come alone. Behind him was a crowd of dissatisfied people. The people were unhappy because they believed the Count's family was swimming in money. Looking out the window, Gislen was horrified by what was happening. Belinda admitted she knew things would turn out this way. She added that in their country there are many merchants who live off festivals and that last year they made a lot of money. Now the festival was about to end after only one day. So the merchants were outraged. Gislen was horrified that the situation was so bad. He understood that if he left things like this, the situation would only get worse. Then he ordered Fergus and the soldiers to calm the crowd. The old man replied with a smile that there were no soldiers yet. He had to explain that most of the soldiers had gone to the forest to wipe out the orcs. Initially, their lands were bogged down in wars due to invader raids, and a forest full of monsters on the other side. Gislen was furious because they had neither soldiers nor money. Then he told Belinda they needed to talk. He said that since Belinda was in charge of his finances, she should have used that cash to shut the merchants up, but the girl said the money wasn't there. With a smile, she reminded him that the Count had forbidden her from giving Gislen a single coin because he spent it like a fool. After thinking it over for a moment, Gislen came to a conclusion: he was basically a beggar. Then he tried to borrow something from Belinda, but she didn't have any money either. After a meager dinner, Gislen sat in his room, realizing they had absolutely nothing left. At this rate, even knowing the future, he was powerless. While he was lost in thought, someone came rushing toward him. A knight burst into the room with a loud shout. Gislen hopped down from the windowsill and asked what the rush was. Ricardo said they had a problem because Cain was demanding to see Gislen. Hearing that name, Gislen was a bit thrown off. By the time Gislen got there, his guards were already taking a beating. Escoban took the brunt of the rage. Cain's hands were stained with the man's blood from the beating. But ignoring that, he just kept pounding on the knight. The force of the blow even left a dent in Escoban's armor. The man was beaten to a pulp by the time Gislen arrived on the scene. Seeing the boy, Escoban trembled, whether from joy or pain. Who knows? But the boy was stunned by what Cain had done to the knight. Hearing the voice, the boy looked away from Escoban and locked eyes with Cain. Cain looked at the boy and said hello. Gislen shot back a dry greeting to his cousin. In fact, he remembered Cain's face all too well. He was the heir to the Lodge lands, the family they had an alliance with. And even at a young age, Cain proved to be an outstanding warrior. Back then, Cain was Gislen's only friend. But in reality, they were enemies. Slowly, Cain walked toward Gislen. Gislen asked Ricardo what was going on there. The man explained that they had been informed of a riot in a local tavern. And when they got to the scene, they ran into Cain, who started asking if the rumors about Gislen were true. The commander began explaining everything in detail. But then he was cut off. Cain was furious that Escoban had lied to his face. Ricardo concluded that everything had led up to what Gislen was seeing now. Cain said it was better to tell the truth and not lie about how Gislen could kill orcs. That's why Cain decided to teach the commander a lesson. However, he blamed Gislen for what happened, claiming he was the one spreading the rumors. Gislen didn't reply. After all, he remembered Cain always treated him like a lackey. When he caused trouble, no one could say a word because Gislen just obeyed him. No one dared to look down on Cain, especially not Gislen, who had suffered from an inferiority complex in the past. Kane's bold nature was seen as fitting for an heir. Gislen chuckled, remembering that he used to get criticized even more because of that contrast. The whole time, Kane was watching the boy. He chuckled, remembering how Gislen used to scream at even the smallest provocation. When they told him to kill Gislen, he was actually surprised. In exchange for this, they promised someone would provide good support for his family. Kane had said that Gislen was also an heir, so they couldn't just get rid of him that easily. They advised him to propose a duel and blame it all on an accident. The man said it would be a golden opportunity for Kane. Kane didn't expect an order to kill his own cousin. But without hesitation, he decided to start right away. Kane figured they wanted to get rid of Gislen because they noticed the changes in him. He chuckled at the thought. Then he asked Gislen what the boy was doing right now. Kane said that since he was here, it was time to bring him what was rightfully his. Since the festival was interrupted, Kane suggested they liven things up. After all, he was sure they were thinking the same thing when it came to having fun. Gislen stood there, lost in thought for a moment. He didn't immediately get what the guy was talking about and asked if Kane meant the same thing. Then he remembered Kane had demanded booze and women when he arrived. In the past, Gislen would have agreed just to avoid a beating. But now he didn't want to spend the money. Suddenly, Belinda's words echoed in his mind, and a thought struck him hard. Gislen realized the source of income had been right there from the start. And by that, he meant Kane. The boy's thoughts were interrupted by a sharp voice. Kane demanded everything be brought out now, assuming Gislen had already heard about it. Gislen agreed, but with one condition. Before that, he wanted Kane to settle his tab. Confused, Kane asked what accounts he was talking about. With a smile, Gislen said that with interest, Kane would have to pay 1,000 gold pieces. Kane retorted that Gislen should treat a friend, but Gislen replied that he was just wiping his feet on him. Gislen demanded they hand over the money before he had to take it by force. In that moment, the tension spiked. Ricardo didn't understand why Gislen was acting like this in front of him. Standing up, Kane said Gislen was mistaken if he thought he could be this insolent. He said Gislen didn't get any stronger just by spreading rumors about his victories. He clenched his fist and said, everyone considered Gislen useless because he was full of crap. Then, Kane decided to engage. But Gislen remained calm in front of him. He dodged the fist easily. Kane immediately threw another punch, but it hit nothing but air. When Kane left himself open, Gislen landed a solid hit on his side. The blow was powerful enough to stun Kane. Gislen attacked again, but Kane managed to block it. Seeing this, Gislen was a little surprised. Suddenly, the man dropped to the ground, screaming loudly in pain. A subordinate ran over and asked what happened. Gislen told him to quit whining because he saw Kane block the hit. The man demanded Gislen leave, acting indignant at what the boy had done. Then everyone started to wonder what was causing the commotion, and Gislen noticed it. He suddenly realized what Kane was doing. Kane whispered, asking if he'd played his part well. The man agreed they'd done a good job faking what Gislen had supposedly started. Then, Kane began to pull something out. He was motivated by the fact that completing the order would get him that support. Plus, this was the perfect chance to get rid of those pathetic Berdiums. Kane pulled off his glove, ready to challenge the Bredic guy to a duel. But before he could even finish smack, a glove flew right into his face. Gislen had beaten him to it. Kane stood there, completely stunned. Gislen called him out, saying Kane had the nerve to attack him, humiliate him in public, and beat people up. He asked, "You gonna deny it?" Dead silence. Kane knew Gislen was an idiot, but he didn't expect the guy to dig his own grave like this. He drew his sword and told Gislen not to regret this later. But the kid just stood there, totally calm in front of Kane. Then, Gislen turned to Ricardo. He told Ricardo to gather all the merchants right now. He told him to spread the word they'd get their money soon. The sudden cancellation of the Bram, the festival had left everyone in a foul mood. and tensions were high since nobody could spend their coin. Gislen decided a good show would help everyone blow off some steam. Soon enough, everything was set up. The duel began with a massive crowd watching. Naturally, people wanted to place bets. Cain was furious. Gislen had turned this duel into a cheap sideshow. He warned him, "My blade won't stop, even if you beg for mercy." The boy didn't say a word. It was obvious anyway that was Cain's real goal all along. Gislen suggested they start since the crowd was waiting. But suddenly, someone interrupted them. The man shouted that the betting was unfair. The crowd gasped. The bookie agreed not a single person had bet on Gislen, for obvious reasons. Gislen wasn't surprised at all. The crowd started yelling, demanding that someone times anyone bet on Gislen. Cain chuckled, saying, "Even the market knows you're worthless." They decided to change the bet to how long he'd last against Cain. But then, a new bet hit the table. Escoban, the guy who'd just lost, bet on Gislen. The boy smiled when he saw that. Then, another bag of coin landed on the table behind him. It was Elena and Belinda. Gislen was shocked to see his sister and the maid there. The crowd was just as stunned to see Elena. Elena said, "This should be enough." Belinda had tried to talk her out of it, but failed. The thief looked annoyed, and Cain was getting impatient with the wait. When the duel finally started, Gislen said, "You're the senior here. It'd be wrong for me to strike first." He readied his blade, gave it a little swing to warm up, and told Cain to come at him. Cain frowned, staring at Gislen. He sneered that Gislen was moving as slow as an old man. In a flash, he closed the distance, but the kid managed to block his cousin's strike. Cain taunted him, saying he'd sunk too low to save face now. The impact of the blow knocked Gislen off balance. Cain tried to follow up fast, but the guy dodged every swing. When Gislen ducked, Cain went for a kick, but he missed, his leg slicing through empty air. The crowd thought Gislen wouldn't last another hit. Hearing them cheer for him, Cain chuckled, but Gislen just watched Cain, raising an eyebrow in thought. Belinda was terrified, thinking they had to stop the duel, while the thief grinned, sure that Gislen was done for. After all, Cain had a massive advantage in raw strength. Once Gislen tired out, Cain would deliver the killing blow. That was how Cain won every single fight. But in the heat of the clash, Cain realized Gislen's skills had actually improved. He spun his sword and gripped the blade. He struck, and Gislen blocked it, but then Cain suddenly yanked the sword back towards himself. Gislen held onto the blade and lunged forward, using all his might. Cain launched Gislen into the air. The crowd held its breath, and Ricardo looked panicked. Meanwhile, the thief was celebrating, thinking Gislen was finished. High in the air, Gislen started plummeting back down, but Gislen looked totally calm. As he landed, he said, "I was going easy on you, Cain. But you just crossed the line." With a single thrust, Gislen closed in. Cain barely managed to block the attack in time. He couldn't even track Gislen's movements. The thief was shocked Gislen had regained his balance by focusing mana into his legs. After the strike, the boy let out a heavy breath. He said, "You're garbage with a weapon? You just bully people with brute strength. Time to wake up." Hearing that, Cain saw red, not understanding how this little runt could touch him. He swung again. Gislen twisted his body and kicked Cain. He broke away from Cain's grip and leaped into the air, spinning mid-flight. He slashed at Cain before landing. Enraged, Cain tried to run him through, but Gislen was too fast. He dodged the blade and stomped on Cain's foot, pinning him in place. With his free hand, he swung his sword. The blade bit into Cain's unprotected neck. For a second, Gislen just stared calmly at his opponent. Then, blood started spraying from Cain's wounds. The crowd erupted. Nobody expected the fight to go down like this. Elena beamed, asking Belinda, Did you see that? Escoban chuckled softly. But the thief was fuming. Cain knew the cuts weren't deep. Even though Gislen could have killed him, he couldn't understand. When did Gislen get this good with a sword? Silence hung between them. Gislen stared him down quietly. But then, to Cain's surprise, he tossed his sword aside. This strength difference isn't very exciting, he said. I'll fight you with my bare hands. That obviously pissed Cain off. But Gislen kept going. I need to teach you a lesson, he said. And my fists are all I need for a guy like you. Hearing that, Cain was insulted. But Gislen insisted on a fist fight, claiming it would give Cain a fighting chance. Then, he dropped a bombshell. I bet 2,000 gold coins that I win. Whispers rippled through the crowd at this weird twist. The thief was shocked. But then he grinned. He was glad to see Gislen digging his own grave again. Right then, they opened the floor for side bets. The murmurs got louder again. And a bunch of people decided to put their money on Cain. But there were some who threw their support behind Gislen now. Cain, though he just found that hilarious, accepting the challenge. He tossed his cape aside, but he decided to keep his sword and rush Gislen. Belinda cursed under her breath and started screaming for Gislen to win. Cain lunged at him. The guy just chuckled at Cain's total lack of common sense. He dodged the blade like it was nothing. Mid-swing, Cain wound up for a kick. But Gislen reacted fast. Shifting his stance in a heartbeat, he slammed Cain's leg. Then instantly followed up fist meeting chin. Cain stumbled back in agony and hit the dirt. Totally confused about where the hell Gislen learned to fight like that, the crowd went wild, roaring as more and more people started believing Gislen actually had this. Meanwhile, the guy told Cain to get his ass up because the fight wasn't over yet. Little by little, Cain started losing his cool. He scrambled up and charged. Cain kept slashing with his sword. But Gislen was still dodging everything perfectly. In the heat of the moment, Cain couldn't figure out why. Just a little while ago, Gislen wouldn't even dare look him in the eye. But now Gislen was clearly the stronger one. Gislen twisted Cain's arm and drove a knee into his side. Cain was already beaten to a pulp. But he kept thinking he had times to kill Gislen for the sake of his family's future. But he couldn't do a damn thing against Gislen except take the beating. After a while, he was battered and shaking from the pain. Then Gislen walked over and grabbed him by the hair. Suddenly, the guy said he actually felt sorry for Cain's father. Gislen remembered how, thanks to their friendship, Cain's dad helped Gislen's family when the Berdiums were on edge. But he noticed Cain didn't share those same ideals. Hearing that, Cain froze in shock. He suddenly remembered how, a few years back, everyone had tried to talk his father out of helping the Berdiums. After all, it hadn't even been a week since he'd wanted to help that family again. Cain didn't understand it back then, and it just pissed him off. When he begged his father not to go, the man stopped. Cain asked him why he wanted to help so badly when everyone was trying to hold him back. His father turned quietly to his son and simply said he considered Gislen's father a friend. Cain stood frozen as that conversation came flooding back. Right then, Gislen prepared to strike again, bracing for the impact. Cain squeezed his eyes shut. But the blow never landed. Then, Cain's voice broke the silence. The guy thought Cain had finally learned his lesson. For a moment, Cain stared at the hand extended toward him, then hung his head. He managed to mumble that he admitted defeat. The bookie didn't see that coming and looked totally shocked. Meanwhile, the crowd was buzzing with joy because Gislen had actually won. Gislen's family was thrilled about the victory. 2. Screaming Cain's name, the bandit ran over to him. He was furious that he'd trusted Cain, only for him to give up like that. But Cain just told the man to go to hell and added that he was leaving. The guy got pissed and called Cain a weakling. At that moment, Gislen appeared right behind him and spoke up. The guy smiled and said it was time to collect what was his. The man didn't immediately get what he was talking about. Then Gislen announced loudly that the man had volunteered to pay for everyone's meat and drinks. Hearing that, the bookie got even more outraged. He shouted that he hadn't agreed to any of that and told the guy to take back his words, but Gislen just rested a hand on his shoulder. He said that was the price for losing and that didn't even count towards the bet. He reminded the man he still had to drop 2,000 gold pieces on the table, then hinted at exactly what would happen if he tried to run. Seeing how terrifying Gislen looked, the bookie got scared stiff. Once he agreed to pay, Gislen let him go and walked away. By the next day, Gislen had the money. He thought he could hire a small squad of mercenaries with it. But since earning that much took forever, the plan didn't really sit right with him. Suddenly, Belinda and Elena popped into the room. Gislen looked at them and asked what was up. Elena asked sarcastically what Gislen was planning to spend the money on, and when her brother asked if she needed something, Elena replied she was just asking. Then Belinda chimed in, saying it was obvious where Gislen would spend it. She went on about how Lady Amelia's birthday was coming up and that Gislen probably wanted to buy her an expensive gift. While the girls chatted about it, Gislen himself stayed silent. Actually, if he was surprised, he even had a fiancée. So, he decided to just ask straight out. Belinda thought he was faking it on purpose, but Elena answered that she was talking about Count Rold's daughter. Hearing that, the guy went into an even bigger stupor. But then it finally clicked who they were talking about. Amelia was loved by everyone for her kind nature and good deeds, but in the future, she would lead a rebellion in the north and be known as the Witch of the North. She was also part of Delphin's plan to overthrow the Gislen family. So the guy got pissed just thinking about that traitor. He asked when she would be returning to her father, and they told him she'd be back in about a week. Gislen figured that would be enough time for him. He was going to pay the Rayfords a visit. But Belinda didn't get why. Since Amelia's birthday hadn't arrived yet, the guy simply replied that he wanted to collect some debts. Meanwhile, Amelia's daily life went on as usual. She asked for the new shoes and offered them to an ordinary village girl. The girl was so moved when Amelia offered her the new pair. Amelia replied that if anyone had to walk barefoot on her lands, it should be her. Then she ordered the guards to provide shelter and food for the people. As the guards started carrying out the order, a commotion broke out. Leaving the scene, Amelia heard waves of gratitude directed at her. When she got back home, they tended to her feet. Bernard praised the girl for her excellent work. The girl suddenly said that while her father always demanded absolute obedience, she understood that most people follow those who give them shelter and bread. The man replied that winning over so many hearts meant she'd definitely tip the scales of the inheritance race in her favor. The girl just stared at him, staying in silence, before kicking him square in the face. Then she asked, "What happened with that duel against the Northern Swordmaster?" Bernard apologized, explaining that winning would have let him draw that man to their side. He kissed the girl's foot, swearing his sword would serve her forever. But she just asked if that's how she raised him, grabbing his chin roughly. She hissed that Bernard better not be a weakling. The man also reported that the Merchant Guild had purchased all the materials for the checkpoint, along with buying out every soldier and knight who'd abandoned the Berdium lands. Amelia praised him, telling him to keep maintaining the facade of an ordinary merchant guild. Suddenly, a servant interrupted their conversation. He delivered a message from the gatekeepers. Gislen had arrived for a visit. Amelia asked with disgust what that walking disaster was doing here. The servant hesitated, not daring to answer. The girl immediately. Everyone was shocked to hear Gislen wanted to discuss business regarding the Merchant Guild. Soon enough, Amelia met Gislen in the drawing room. Sitting across from her, Gislen greeted the girl, but she didn't respond. Only her cat hissed at him. The girl remarked with disgust that barging in unannounced was rude. The boy replied he'd decided to bring a gift first, showing her a flower. He mentioned buying it right out front of the guild, and then added that he decided to do all his shopping at the Actium Guild from now on. Amelia stayed silent, a slight frown creasing her brow. Then she shot up from her seat, claiming she didn't quite get his meaning. She dismissed him with disgust. saying the gift was accepted so he could leave. But Gislen dryly told her to sit back down. Hearing that tone, the girl froze right where she stood, turning to face him. She wondered if this was really the same guy who used to just stutter whenever he saw her. Gislen immediately stated he needed money, 10,000 gold. Hearing such a sum, the girl frowned. Amelia was indignant, asking if she should take this as the will of his family. But Gislen said this concerned him alone, adding that Amelia wouldn't be marrying him anyway. The girl froze, frowning in surprise. Gislen went on, saying she'd probably prefer marrying the knight standing behind the door to increase her power. The next moment, he was interrupted by a loud hiss from Amelia's cat, standing right in front of the boy. The cat kept hissing, while the girl replied dryly that such things shouldn't be said, even as a joke. Then Gislen promised to keep everything a secret if she lent him the money, but Amelia still refused. When she called for Bernard, the man entered immediately. Approaching Gislen, he greeted the boy. Gislen knew Bernard was a pillar of support for Amelia, and knew that even now, the man possessed strength comparable to a swordmaster. Gislen pointed out that if he died here, it would start a land war. But Amelia countered that they'd make it look like the annoying pest was killed by a bodyguard for breaking into his fiancée's room. Then she told Bernard to get rid of him. Preparing to follow orders, the man drew his sword. Although Amelia had gone too far, Gislen wasn't surprised. Instead, he decided to take things seriously. Bracing for a fight, Gislen drew his sword as well. As Bernard watched the boy, a smile played on his lips. Gislen was staring back at Bernard, but suddenly noticed something. There was a sudden movement behind him. Turns out they decided to attack from his blind spot. But the enemy's sword just pierced through the back of the chair. The assassin kept coming, so Gislen flipped backward. At just the right moment, he extended his legs and kicked the man. A loud crash echoed as the window shattered, taking the man and the chair with it. Seeing this, Amelia and Bernard were shocked. Gislen was indignant that they'd even sent an assassin to kill him, remarking that their hospitality was absolute trash. He readied himself. Then, their swords clashed in battle. Gislen dryly noted that the House of Reifold clearly didn't teach manners. Bernard retorted that Gislen was the first to show disrespect, so he had no right to expect a warm welcome. Bernard tried to strike Gislen, but the boy dodged. Gislen spun around, attempting a kick, but missed. Then he lashed out with his other leg and connected. Bernard stumbled back from the heavy kick. He knew Gislen as someone with zero skill, but it was clear now the guy had plenty of experience. Interrupting his thoughts, Amelia ordered Bernard to get serious. She demanded he move and bring her Gislen's head. Seeing her glare, Bernard froze for a second, then steeled himself, preparing to kill Gislen for real. The boy just laughed at a common knight acting so high and mighty with him. Bernard replied that it was merely an invitation to duel. Then, both opponents braced themselves for a heavy clash. Bernard closed the distance first, reaching Gislen in an instant. Reacting fast, the boy stepped back just enough to dodge. However, Bernard's attack still left a small cut on the boy's cheek. Bernard was faster than he looked. Then they began fighting in earnest, constantly dodging and striking at one another. Watching them, Amelia couldn't comprehend how Gislen was fighting on par with Bernard. But suddenly, she frowned. Meanwhile, the battle only intensified. Gislen blocked a blade that came way too close to his face, then stepped in to attack Bernard. Fortunately for him, Bernard dodged the blow and decided to pin the guy's sword down. Once he did, he tried to run Gislen through with his blade, but Gislen just asked why Bernard was trying that move again. Saying that, Gislen leaped into the air. But mid-jump, he realized something had changed. A massive amount of mana began pouring off Bernard. The man replied that the same techniques wouldn't work on him twice. He deflected Gislen's attack and slammed the boy into the ground. The impact was heavy, and Gislen shuddered in pain. Bernard didn't wait. He was about to strike again. But Gislen dodged the blade, leaping back a few meters to create distance. He hadn't expected Bernard to use mana just to counter that move. Suddenly, Bernard spoke up, admitting Gislen was truly different from the rumors, parrying Gislen's sword. He added that the boy had real battle experience, not just moves perfected in training. He noted those techniques worked well, but not against him. Bernard was certain it was all over for Gislen. But Gislen realized they'd already crossed the line. Bernard aimed straight for his head. In close quarters, technique alone struggles to overcome a physical gap. That's why he thought it wasn't worth bothering with Bernard at all. But Gislen simply remarked that he was short on time. 2. With that, he readied his attack. Unexpectedly, Bernard saw mana and threads. He realized too late that Gislen was using wires. In that instant, the pommel of Gislen's sword slammed into the back of the man's head. Moving fast, Gislen closed the distance and drove his knee into Bernard's face with everything he had. Bernard staggered back, unable to comprehend how the boy had done it. Watching this, Amelia started to worry about her knight. Gislen gripped his sword, ready to strike. He swung with full force, but Bernard managed to keep his guard up. Immediately, he spun around, forcing Gislen back for a moment to break free from the assault. Gislen quickly regained his balance and touched down. Bernard then told the girl she'd better leave. He couldn't guarantee her safety anymore. He was about to play all his cards. Gislen agreed, saying this was exactly how a fight should be. The boy remarked that it had been a long time since he'd faced a worthy opponent. Hearing Bernard's warning, Amelia turned to flee. Furious that Gislen had dared to humiliate her, she kept thinking someone must have leaked information about the Merchant Guild. Because of the rumors surrounding Gislen, the girl had thought he was simply lucky. Now, she realized she'd been completely wrong about him. She wondered aloud what the guards she'd posted were doing. But when she rounded the corner, she saw her entire squad defeated. There was a girl standing in the Protax middle, who turned at the sound of her voice. Seeing Amelia, Belinda waved hello. Amelia demanded to know who she was, but the girl just told Amelia to shut up. In a flash, she was standing right behind Amelia. The cold steel of a knife against her throat left Amelia bewildered, snatching the spider ornament off her. Belinda was surprised Amelia was still wearing the thing. Smiling, the girl remarked that she thought this was all because of the engagement. Belinda knew Amelia's family didn't love her, seeing how insects were constantly trailing her. So, she had raised her own to take revenge on everyone. Though she wasn't sure if it was out of trauma or a need for validation, she tossed the spider aside, telling Amelia it didn't suit her. Then crushed it underfoot and asked for her cooperation. More mana began to pour off Bernard, filling nearly the entire room. Gislen noticed the air itself had become heavy. The pressure was intense. Bernard acknowledged Gislen as a worthy opponent, but then questioned how Gislen could possibly consider himself an aristocrat on Amelia's level. Gislen confirmed his nobility, but scoffed at such a statement coming from a mere bodyguard. There was silence for a moment, and then the clash resumed. Pressing his attack, Bernard demanded he not disgrace the honor of the aristocracy. The strikes were blindingly fast, yet Gislen still managed to block them. Even so, every hit was a major threat. In the heat of battle, he realized Bernard was truly enraged. He relentlessly hounded Gislen with attacks. But eventually, the boy grew tired of it. Gripping his sword tighter, he finally knocked Bernard's blade aside, striking hard and preparing to finish the man. But Bernard reacted, deciding to counterattack. In doing so, he knocked the sword from Gislen's hand this time. Gislen was shocked by the power of that last blow, and Bernard declared this would be Gislen's final attack. At that moment, his blade was aimed straight at Gislen's neck, but for some reason, a confused look crossed his face. It turned out, Gislen was prepared to take a hit. He had intentionally used his shoulder to deflect the blade. Seizing the dake. Moment of confusion. Gislen launched his own attack. Bernard was furious. There was no room to relax with this kid, but he managed to deflect Gislen's sword again, then slammed a kick into the boy's side. The man sneered that there was a difference between a veteran and someone just swinging a sword to show off. Gislen's back slammed against the wall with brutal force, but he could still keep fighting. Gislen analyzed the situation. Bernard's speed and combo attacks allowed him to control the battle's flow. In a direct clash, he made it look like their swords were locked and inseparable. Gislen realized that with his current mana, he couldn't defeat Bernard. But that limit only applied to the mana he had right now. He realized Bernard was missing a key piece of information. After all, he didn't know Gislen possessed a unique mana cultivation technique. Once he activated it, Gislen's speed skyrocketed. In an instant, he was right on top of Bernard, their swords clashing once more. However, moments later, Gislen managed to disarm his opponent. When the weapon flew, Bernard froze in shock. He couldn't understand where the boy had summoned so much mana mid-fight. Gislen stopped the blade just as the tip touched Bernard's forehead. By then, Belinda and Amelia had entered the room. Amelia hurriedly told Gislen he could take the money and just get out of there. Gislen asked why she couldn't have just given him the money when he asked politely. Saying that, he pulled his sword away from Bernard. Belinda quipped that this couldn't even be called a lover's quarrel. Gislen replied that they simply had a disagreement. Then, he added that he had some bad news for Amelia. After all, now, he wouldn't settle for anything less than 20,000 gold. As Gislen walked away, an uproar broke out in the palace. Livid, Amelia kept smashing everything around her. Bernard apologized, saying what happened was his fault. But the girl ignored him, muttering that Gislen had changed so much. Bernard asked if she wanted to report this to Duke Dolphin, but Amelia slapped him across the face, telling him to watch his tongue because Duke Dolphin was a terrible person. She admitted she was secretly collaborating with Dolphin because he would help get rid of the Berdiums. But she was more worried about what would happen if the Merchant Guild secret got out. So Gislen had to die. After listening to her, Bernard accepted her order. He reported that Gislen had a deep wound on his shoulder and several small cuts. And since he used a lot of mana, he would need time to recover. However, something was bothering Bernard. He said they shouldn't use their own knights. Amelia agreed, saying they needed dogs bred specifically for this kind of work. Bernard was horrified when he realized what Amelia was thinking. The girl told him to send war orphans with no family or status. She ordered him to round up a dozen who were good at mana control. Meanwhile, Bernard was already figuring out where to set an ambush. Having thought it through, he promised Amelia he would get everything ready, and Amelia looked forward to making Gislen pay for humiliating her. Meanwhile, Gislen continued on his way, bandaging his wounds. He couldn't stop thinking about that traitor, Amelia. They were worried about Gislen, but he reassured everyone, saying he was fine. He thought the wound wasn't too deep for such a risky move, and it was worth it because now he had a huge sum of money. He wouldn't have minded wringing Amelia's neck either. But he didn't want to start a war. Since they were already defending against barbarians, Gislen decided to handle this with minimal bloodshed. And this time, Gislen was going to use Amelia. Belinda watched the boy in silence, then suddenly asked if everything had gone according to plan. She said he told her to handle security if she heard fighting and to take Amelia hostage. Gislen agreed that was the plan, but then asked Fergus about it. As soon as the boy said this, he felt a sharp pain. Gislen flinched, making everyone worry. Now Gislen understood the consequences of activating the third core, and that over time, it could cause problems. He was thinking about finding a safe way to increase his mana when Belinda suddenly grabbed his hand. The girl decided to check his pulse, and then said his mana flow was too disrupted. Suddenly, a strange light began to glow from her hands. Watching the process, Gislen started to guess what was happening. He felt intense pain and nausea again. But instead of coughing up blood like usual, he exhaled a strange air. Gislen realized the blockage in his mana pathways had cleared, and that such healing was possible with deep mana compression. Belinda had been brought in by Gislen's mother, so he guessed the maid was unusual. But he didn't know exactly who she was. Still, Gislen understood that the more powerful allies he had, the better. Suddenly, Belinda said she believed in Gislen and would always be ready to help. Then she asked why Gislen needed so much money. After a brief silence, the boy said Amelia was the only one who could get that kind of money. Belinda and Fergus were shocked to hear this reasoning. Belinda said he would be in trouble if anyone found out. But the boy assured her Amelia wouldn't tell a soul. Then asked if Belinda believed him. The girl agreed and asked him to tell her how he was going to spend the money. But when Gislen spoke about the monster forest, Belinda froze in horror. Gislen said seriously that they needed resources to clear the forest. To Fergus, this seemed unthinkable, since they had been trying to clear the forest for a long time without success. Interrupting him, Gislen asked what happened with the request he made before leaving. The old man was a bit confused by the question. Then, replied that the person Gislen mentioned was at that very location. Gislen said he would go there immediately. But Belinda insisted on returning home, so Gislen reminded her that Amelia wouldn't just let this go. Belinda said she and Fergus had fought well. But the boy replied that circumstances had changed, and now he wanted to find a responsible commander. That was why they had ventured into the wild wilderness. The place looked abandoned, and no one answered the door. But they were definitely in the right spot. Suddenly, the door swung open, and a man covered in a thick beard appeared, asking who had come. Seeing him, everyone except Gislen was surprised. Belinda said the man looked miserable and didn't seem like a responsible commander. However, Gislen replied that this was the man standing right in front of them, closing the door. The man told them to leave and not waste his time. Then, Gislen addressed Gislen by name, making the mercenary captain stop. The man turned to look at the boy and saw Gislen reaching out his hand, saying he missed Gislen. Everyone was shocked when they heard about the mercenary squad. The Ratatosk mercenary group was so famous that even after disbanding, everyone remembered them, and their leader was Gislen, whom Gislen was now inviting to join them. But at that moment, an axe flew through the air, whizzing past Gislen and tearing his clothes. The unexpected attack left everyone stunned. Gislen asked sternly how the boy knew about him, and demanded to know why Gislen had come here. Belinda asked Gislen to step aside because she wasn't sure the man was in his right mind. But Gislen said he knew how to help Gislen's daughter, suggesting the man talk calmly. The patients presented fevers and coughed up blood. Those affected by the disease writhed in pain until they died, which was why the illness was nicknamed Endless Punishment. Feeling intense pain, the girl screamed, her voice filling the room. Approaching her, Gislen hugged his daughter. Gislen realized it wasn't too late. In the past, Gislen couldn't hire Gislen because he committed suicide after his daughter's death. And judging by the state of the place, it was obvious Gislen had spent every last dime on the girl's treatment. She was screaming, begging to die. She just couldn't take the pain anymore. Gislen knew they were out of time. He decided to start the treatment right then. But someone stopped him. Belinda suggested he should just leave. She asked how they could possibly help when even the priests had failed. But Gislen shook her off. He said Times was the one who could fix this. Then, he looked at her and asked, "Do you trust me?" Hearing that question again left the girl confused. Then, Gislen handed her a note. He told her to go buy everything on that list. Now, she was shocked when she saw what was written down. That disease was supposed to be incurable. But in the future, they'd found a cure. Since it was a hot topic back then, Gislen remembered exactly how to make the antidote. The only catch was the ingredients were pricey. But hey, they had the cash. So, Gislen got to work. When he was done, he handed the medicine to the man. He kept it simple, make sure Rachel drinks this. Without wasting a second, Gislen gave the antidote to his daughter. At first, nothing happened. But then, the spots on her skin started to fade. Fewer and fewer spots remained. And peace finally returned to the girl's face. Everyone watching was just stunned. They couldn't believe their eyes as the marks actually vanished. Gislen could barely process it. The medicine had actually worked. Gislen noted that it seemed to be working. But Gislen asked, "How is this even possible? Even high-level healers had been powerless against this." Gislen explained that a saint's power isn't unlimited, it depends on the patient's strength and will to live. Hearing that, the man's hands started to tremble. He asked if his daughter was really going to make it. Gislen told him she'd be fully cured in 2 months. And for the first time, hope returned to Gislen's eyes. Overwhelmed, he dropped to his knees. He asked Gislen what he wanted in return. Because he knew the guy hadn't come there for nothing. Gislen had nothing left but his own body. So he was ready to become a slave if he had to. But Gislen just replied that he needed a real-times mercenary leader. Gislen looked the boy dead in the eye, wondering what he was truly after. Silently, the man grabbed his long braid with one hand and his axe with the other. Slice. He cut it off. Everyone stared at Gislen in shock. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. It was like a completely different person was standing in front of them. Gislen turned and walked to the other side of the room. He asked if anyone else was with Gislen. Specifically, any enemies. Gislen said everyone who came with him was already inside. Then Gislen asked if Gislen had any enemies holding a grudge. Gislen replied, "In the future, there's gonna be a lot more." Gislen grabbed a spear and hurled it at the wall. It punched a massive hole right through it and flew straight into a tree outside. Then, Gislen yanked the rope attached to the spear, dragging a spy right into the room. He grabbed the guy by the neck, choking a strangled cough out of him. Gislen demanded to know who sent him. The man just muttered, "Impossible." Gislen asked what to do with him. But Gislen told him to keep it quiet, since he already guessed who sent the spy. Gislen admitted he didn't want to get his hands dirty today. But this guy didn't leave him much choice. Gislen said he'd handle it himself. And with that, he crushed the man's throat, killing him instantly. When it was done, he bowed to Gislen. Belinda noticed there wasn't a shred of hesitation in his movements. But she couldn't figure out why Gislen needed someone so violent. Gislen swore his life now belonged to Gislen. Gislen just nodded and said, "I'm counting on you, Commander." Soon enough, Gislen's enemies found out their scout squad had been wiped out. But one of them calmed the others down, realizing they'd made too much noise. The soldiers apologized to their captain. But the captain figured there was no way Gislen could have spotted the spies on his own. Then he found out the kid had apparently hired Gislen. That news made him snap. He grabbed his own soldier in a rage. He screamed, asking if it was true. Shaking with fear, the man confirmed he'd seen it with his own eyes. Surprisingly, the captain was glad. Gislen had finally shown his face. Meanwhile, as they moved through the forest, Belinda complained that the carriage was way too cramped. She said Gislen wasn't a weapons trader, so a sword or axe should be enough for him. Gislen told her to drop it. They needed the carriage to transport Rachel anyway. He asked for patience, saying it could all be useful. Then he asked if the spy was sent by Amelia. When confirmed, he muttered, "That's trouble." After all, the guy was wearing a mask from the Wildcats Guild. Gislen knew that guild was strictly illegal. Smugglers, assassins, drug traffickers, the works. Belinda noted they were a powerful dark guild, mostly because they recruited retired mercenaries. She told Gislen to watch his back, but he said there was nothing to worry about. After all, He had Gislen now. They kept moving. But suddenly, someone closed in on them. Gislen spotted the enemies instantly. They had the carriage surrounded and were aiming for Gislen. But he grabbed the weapons from his back, sword in one hand, axe in the other. He blocked both strikes and launched a counterattack on the assassins. He even sliced one of them clean in half. Bodies hit the ground. But the carriage kept rolling forward on its own. Then, ambushers hiding in the trees cut the ropes, sending a massive tree crashing down toward the carriage. Belinda screamed, thinking they were done for. But Gislen yanked the reins, swerving the carriage just in time. It screeched to a halt, and the tree smashed into the ground inches away. Gislen wasn't surprised by the ambush at all. Meanwhile, dozens of people surrounded the carriage. One of them called out to Gislen. Hearing his name, Gislen looked at the squad leader. The assassin called him a coward for disbanding their gang just because of his daughter. Stepping off the carriage, Gislen said he didn't know what the guy was talking about. The assassin kept ranting, saying his life went to hell because of Gislen, and that Gislen didn't even recognize his old friend. Gislen remained silent. So, the commander assumed he was just pretending not to recognize him. He ordered his men to join the fray. Gislen offered to help, but Gislen turned him down. As they swarmed him, a massive surge of mana erupted from his body, wiping out the enemies in a heartbeat. But the rest didn't flinch, they just kept coming. Gislen parried the weapon, then used his axe to slice through the assassin's torso. He severed the next man's hand and slammed the axe into his neck. He easily blocked the next attacker too, chopping off his hand with a single swing. The captain realized Gislen's strength hadn't faded one bit. He ordered the squad to split up and flank him from both sides. Reacting instantly, Gislen leaped onto his horse. While they were still confused, Gislen grabbed the weapon from the saddle and charged forward, swinging his axe. To put more power behind the strike, he gripped the weapon with both hands, striking down several men at once. One of the bandits yelled for someone to spook the horse, but Gislen didn't give them the chance, he just kept slaughtering them. Watching this, even Belinda looked a little horrified. Suddenly, an assassin tried to strike from above, but Gislen reacted fast, blocking it with his shield. The captain shouted that Gislen had no right to interfere with the man whose life he was ruining, swearing he'd kill him. Leaping back, he slashed at the horse. The animal collapsed instantly from the deep wounds. As Gislen hit the ground, they tried to rush him, but he blocked the strike with his axe and bashed the man in the ribs with his shield. The impact sent the assassin skidding back several meters. He was shocked to hear Gislen was no longer the leader of Ratatosk, demanding to know who he was, if not that. Gislen replied that he'd left the past behind now. He was nothing more than Gislen's assistant. That only made the assassin even more furious. He charged forward, vowing once again to kill Gislen. A fierce duel broke out, but Gislen easily blocked every blow with his shield. The assassin screamed that when Gislen left, the squad fell apart. Because of him, he had lost his life's purpose. Gislen had no answer for that. He just kept fighting the mercenary in silence. But the man was strong too, dodging Gislen's attacks. With a powerful kick, the man struck the shield. It couldn't withstand the pressure, and a hole punched right through it. He ranted that he'd dedicated his life to the unit, gave it everything he had, and Gislen threw it all away to become someone's dog. He could never forgive his old comrade for that. With that, he hurled daggers at Gislen. The shield was useless now, so Gislen started counterattacking with his weapon instead. As he dodged the blades, the assassin appeared right in front of him. Gislen reacted instantly, stepping back to evade the strike. He tried to strike, but the assassin dodged that too. The man stared at Gislen like he was looking at a madman. He admitted Gislen used to be strong, but while Gislen was busy worrying about his daughter, the mercenary had kept training. Now, Gislen was no match for him. The assassin kicked the blades stuck in the ground, launching them at Gislen again. But he blocked them with his hand. In that moment, The assassin closed the distance. Gislen tried to strike, but the man leaped away to dodge. The mercenary lunged, aiming to finish him off, but Gislen caught the knife with his bare hand, asking if that was really the reason for his revenge. At that moment, the mercenary realized Gislen hadn't been fighting with his full strength at all. Just as the thought crossed his mind, something heavy smashed into his face. The blow sent him flying backward until he slammed hard against a tree. Gislen said he didn't understand. After all, the mercenary had plenty of chances for revenge. Why hadn't he come for him sooner? The man laughed, saying Gislen was clueless. He had times come. But he didn't find a leader, just a washed-up old man he didn't want to dirty his hands with. He asked where the Gislen he used to idolize had gone. Gislen threw his sword to the ground. He said he served another now, but he would grant his old comrade a great honor as the commander of Ratatosk. Grabbing the sword, the mercenary hoped for a real battle. Gislen blocked the strike easily, but the mercenary screamed that this times was the fight he'd been waiting for. They clashed at lightning speed. Gislen lunged, striking fast, but his attacks were dodged. The same happened when the mercenary attacked. But finally, an opening appeared, and Gislen landed a strike. The man's face twisted in agony, but he kept fighting. Suddenly, Gislen swung his axe, saying he remembered him, the captain of the Ratatosk 5th Squad. He even called Viego by his name. Hearing that, the man smiled. Then, Gislen killed him. He stood over his dead comrade's body for a while. Suddenly, someone praised his efforts. Belinda and Gislen walked up, the girl babbling about the good money they'd make selling the loot. Gislen apologized for dragging out the fight, but Gislen didn't care. In fact, Gislen had exceeded all expectations. The old stories about him rising as the king of mercenaries were true. He asked Gislen if he remembered the man. Gislen confirmed it was his former comrade. Hearing the word comrade, Gislen paused to think. He wondered what his own companions were doing right now. Before they met, they all had their own lives. One day, Gislen would bring them back together. 2 days later, they reached the lands of Berdium. Gislen asked if this was the place, and Gislen gave a brief confirmation. The boy thought it must be nice to have something to return to, since he never had that in the past. Gislen watched Gislen in silence. Gislen asked what he thought of his lands. Gislen said they weren't bad. Gislen agreed they were a total dump. Gislen had heard these lands were constantly at war with barbarians, but it turned out to be worse than he expected. Gislen wanted to resolve these problems, so he asked Gislen for help. The battle was expected to be long, but the boy was determined to restore the lands. Suddenly, Belinda saw something ahead and screamed, looking into the distance. Gislen's gaze also took on a hint of surprise. Up ahead, he saw the man who was his father. The vassals discussed how best to use the available forces, but some believed the rifles were no help, reporting that they had attacked the soldiers. Gislen listened to this entire conversation in silence, thinking with a smile that nothing had changed. Although he was a young knight now, he possessed decades of experience. So the boy told everyone they had worked hard, then turned toward his father. His father looked at his son sternly. Gislen remembered that as a child he was afraid of his father because of that stern face. But now he understood why his father was like that. It was due to the burden of responsibility resting on his father's shoulders. His father asked where Gislen had gone for a week. The boy replied that he had gone to see the rifles. His father asked if he had caused them any trouble, but the boy answered no. Then, suddenly, a man mentioned that Gislen won money in a duel with Cain, and then the man asked if the young master had already managed to spend it all. Gislen replied that he had simply gone to settle a matter with Amelia. Another man spoke up, reminding him of the responsibility Gislen held as the heir. Then the count interrupted everyone. Gislen heard from him that there were still problems. He asked if it was true that Gislen had killed Jamal and Philip, who were trying to sell Elena. Gislen immediately remembered those nights. Another man said Gislen probably couldn't handle them directly, so he pitted them against each other. The knights were traitors. But Gislen understood that no one was happy about the death of knights. Gislen said that was more or less what happened. And the man looked satisfied with his own deduction. Suddenly, Gislen heard praise. Father said the most important thing was that Elena was safe. Gislen was surprised because it was the first time his father had praised him. So he decided to ask his father for a favor. A man said that if it was about funds, that wasn't happening. Another agreed that Gislen had too many sins committed in anger. He even started listing them. And Gislen had nothing to reply because it was the truth. Gislen replied that out of courtesy, he wanted to ask his father's permission. But he would carry out the plan regardless. However, he refused to tell Belinda about this for now. After all, he understood that if there was an information leak, there would be trouble. He knew that, in the monster forest, there was a place with many rune stones. This mineral was imbued with magic, which was why everyone went crazy for it. It was often used to create various instruments. Basically anywhere magic was utilized. In the past, the Dolphin family took over these deposits. But since he knew everything beforehand, he wanted to change that. But Belinda didn't like being in the dark. Yet she still agreed to do everything, Gislen said. And when he asked to hire an army, Julian asked the boy if he was sure about this, because it would attract attention. But Gislen knew the right people and even wanted to hold a selection among them. Julian guessed who Gislen was talking about. Although those mercenaries were strong, if they weren't satisfied with something, they would tear you to pieces. But still, Gislen wanted to hire the Cerberus mercenary squad. The next day, they went to tame these dogs. Their camp was located on the outskirts of the lands. When Julian and Gislen approached their camp, they were spotted. The mercenaries laughed at the fact that it seemed the travelers didn't know where they had wandered into. One of them said they looked like ordinary aristocrats. But when he looked again through the telescope, he saw a sudden movement. A terrible scream was heard, attracting the attention of all the mercenaries. Suddenly, Julian approached one of them and grabbed him by the head. He began to squeeze the poor guy's head tightly, but then waved his hand and sent the mercenary flying. Seeing Julian's strength, all the mercenaries grew cautious. Realizing something was wrong with the old man, they grabbed their weapons and surrounded him. Suddenly, someone said that even an aristocrat shouldn't have come to them like that. The man warned the travelers they wouldn't leave alive. But suddenly, the smile vanished from his face. It was because Gislen approached them. The boy asked them who was in charge here. Then the man walked toward the boy, talking to the mercenaries. The aristocrat behaved surprisingly bravely. But in the end, the mercenary smiled. He told everyone they were looking at another crazy aristocrat. And then he brandished his weapon and threw it at the boy with all his might. As the heavy object approached him, Gislen showed no reaction. Suddenly, the weapon changed its direction. It was because Julian intervened. The man was surprised that the chain could be pierced by a sword. Gislen guessed he wouldn't be understood through nice words. He told Julian to act as he saw fit, but not to kill the mercenaries. Having accepted the order, the man pulled on the chain. The owner of the weapon was dragged along with the chain. With all his strength, Julian managed to throw the man into the air. But suddenly, the chain coiled around his neck. Using mana, he struck the mercenary. When the man could no longer fight, others rushed into the fray. However, Julian picked up the man's body and then threw it at the mercenaries advancing toward him. They all fell nearby with a crash. When they were finished, Julian turned to look at the others. Looking into his eyes, the others got scared. Dismounting from his horse, Gislen asked how much longer he would have to wait. He demanded they finally bring him the boss. Suddenly, a guy said that before this, he had been sleeping peacefully. Kaor introduced himself and asked what Gislen needed. Gislen replied that he wanted to hire them. But Kaor was indignant because he had beaten his men before that. He said calmly that aristocrats must know manners. But Gislen said it was a greeting and the best way to make them obey. The kid chuckled. asking if Gislen was planning a massacre next time. Then, he agreed to at least consider the proposal. Gislen replied that they needed to talk about the monster forest, that's why he needed mercenaries. Kaor asked just who the hell. Gislen thought he was to invade a place like that. But when Gislen introduced himself, the mercenaries went dead silent the moment they heard his name. Then they all burst out laughing, saying his little stunt made sense now. Kaor sneered that there was no room for people like Gislen there. And he didn't want to hear another word. At that point, he figured the negotiations were over. Gislen stood there in silence for a moment. Suddenly, he asked Kaor if he was actually scared. Gislen chuckled, noting that the rumors about this squad were clearly exaggerated. That made Kaor change his tune. He suggested they discuss the price. They were mercenaries. After all, Gislen simply stated that the weak always look for excuses. Kaor retorted that he might have played along. But Gislen's little provocation ruined everything. He told Gislen to pay for the damages and get lost. But Gislen wasn't having it. He challenged Kaor, invoking the confession of Moriana. Kaor asked the kid if he even knew what that meant. Gislen replied that of course he did. It was the name of a traditional duel in the mercenary world. The participants had to fight without mana, and their hands were bound. The duel takes place inside a circle you can't leave. There have been plenty of cases where both fighters ended up dead. Gislen knew the loser had to obey the winner. He offered Kaor the duel. Julian was shocked that Gislen wanted to follow mercenary customs. Refusing a duel was considered a disgrace. So Kaor couldn't say no. As they waited for his answer, the tension in the room spiked. Finally, Kaor said that if the young master wanted recognition mercenary style, he had to respect that choice. In no time at all, everything was set for the fight. After wrapping their hands, the opponents stepped into the circle. Julian watched in silence while the mercenaries screamed in support of their leader. Kaor told Gislen that learning a couple of tricks wouldn't be enough to win, and there was no turning back now. Suddenly, Gislen was. He yanked forward. He didn't expect that, pulling the kid toward him. Kaor bragged that he'd won 5 times just like this. Hearing that, Gislen pulled back. He said that number wasn't nearly enough, then yanked the guy toward him, replying that he'd won like this hundreds of times. When they heard the protected start signal, their opinions changed instantly. In a flash, they aimed their blades at each other's throats, both dodging the attack at the exact same time. Looking at Gislen, you could see the confusion in Kaor's eyes. He didn't expect that kind of reaction from some ordinary noble. Their attacks were identical. Whenever one tried a direct strike, the other blocked it perfectly, trying to throw Gislen off balance. Kaor yanked the kid's arm. But even with the taunts, Gislen stood his ground. When Kaor tried to attack from behind, Gislen ducked just in time. Right after, he tried to strike the mercenary leader, but Kaor successfully dodged that too. So, Kaor decided to kick his opponent. Gislen reacted and blocked it with his own leg. But the moment he blocked, he felt a sharp pain. Kaor noticed the kid was holding up well. But it was weird, how could he have won hundreds of times if winning even once was this hard? After attacking, he told Gislen that if a kid wants to brag, he should come up with something believable. The crowd screamed for Kaor, begging him to kill the noble. But when Julian glared at the mercenaries, they shut up immediately. After silencing the mercenaries, the man kept watching, realizing the fight was looking bad for Gislen. The circle was too small, even for one person, with no mana allowed. Everything came down to weight and raw physical strength. Their bound hands restricted movement even more. Gislen could barely block Kaor's attacks, meaning Kaor could easily take the lead in the battle. But if things got too dangerous, Julian was ready to step in, grabbing Gislen by the arm. Kaor prepared to stab the guy in the side with a knife. But as he swung, Gislen jumped over him and landed on his feet without any trouble. But right then, he felt that pain in his leg again. Now he was sure without using mana, The damage would just pile up wherever he blocked the hit. Kaor noticed that. Judging by Gislen's face, things were going south for him. He thought Gislen's attempts to resist were pathetic. But he was definitely the most stubborn noble Kaor had ever met. And Kaor was sure he knew what Gislen was thinking. This fight was a confession without mana. So as long as Gislen kept blocking, the damage would only accumulate. Gislen could already feel his leg starting to cramp, and it showed clearly on his face. But Kaor wanted the kid to keep fighting. It just made things more fun. Twirling the blade in his fingers, Kaor switched his grip. Then he threw a punch that Gislen managed to block. When Kaor aimed for his head, Gislen ducked. Kaor shifted his hand to follow Gislen's head. But Gislen blocked the opponent's hand with his own. Taking the initiative, Kaor managed to lock Gislen's hand, then tried to kick. Gislen reacted, blocking with his leg just like last time. But when he did, a sharp pain shot through his leg. Then Kaor said it was time to end this, aiming his blade at Gislen's neck. He was about to kill the kid just as Julian had feared. Julian drew his axe. However, right at that moment, a smile appeared on Gislen's face. Unexpectedly, he dodged Kaor's strike. He shifted his stance and prepared to attack. That was when blood was spilled for the first time in the duel. Seeing his own wound, Kaor froze for a moment. Everyone was equally shocked. Seeing this, Kaor spun around, trying to attack again. But Gislen dodged it. He threw another punch, but the kid dodged that too. Then Gislen countered, slashing Kaor across the chest. That was the second cut. And the crowd was getting confused. The mood started to shift. Everyone thought Kaor was dominating. But he attacked again and missed again. Immediately, Gislen slammed him with a shoulder check. Then he pummeled his face and neck with a flurry of punches and raised his hand, only to bring it down hard, stabbing a knife right into Kaor's hand. Enraged, Kaor started attacking wildly. He couldn't understand what had changed just a moment ago. Gislen could barely stand. But Gislen had been watching, analyzing the whole time, figuring everything out. The heavy swings were burning out his muscles. In his desperation to take the lead, Kaor was losing his speed, while Gislen stayed perfectly calm. Julian hadn't thought a weight difference like that could be overcome so easily. Suddenly, Kaor heard his men grumbling that they were getting bored, saying he needed to finish Gislen off. Gislen remarked that Kaor's stamina was impressive, saying most would have given up or run out of mana by now. But Kaor shot back that anyone who breaks the ritual's rules has no place in the mercenary world. Smiling, Gislen admitted he was impressed. And suddenly, Kaor admitted that, skill-wise, he was the inferior one. However, he said victory wasn't just about skill. He spun around sharply and yanked Gislen toward him. Whoever crossed the circle's edge was the loser. Didn't matter how skilled Gislen was if he got thrown out and touched the ground. It was over. With that in mind, Kaor was sure he'd won. But spinning quickly, Gislen shifted his grip with his free hand. He almost hit the dirt. But right before he did, he kicked Kaor with both feet. Using the momentum from his bound hands, he swung himself back inside the circle. That threw Kaor off balance, allowing Gislen to tackle the mercenary leader to the ground. And in that moment, it turned out Kaor had gone outside the circle. Kaor was furious that he'd lost the fight, but Gislen told him the victory was his. Kaor asked the kid who the hell he was and where he got those skills. But Gislen just snapped that Kaor was disrespecting his master, and jerked him up roughly. Confused, Kaor said the fight was already over. But Gislen replied, not yet. He hadn't left the circle himself, so he decided it was time to train his new subordinate. Immediately after, he smashed a heavy fist into Kaor's face. He hit the ground again, leaving the onlookers in shock. Kaor tried to stop the kid, tried to remind him of the rules, but he didn't get the chance. Gislen attacked again. asking if Kaor would try explaining the rules to his enemies on the battlefield too. When Kaor tried to object, Gislen told him never to question the master's words. Kaor wanted to call the guy crazy. But again, he was cut short. The beating went on for a while. The others didn't know if they should step in, so they just stood there watching. Finally, Kaor screamed, begging Gislen to stop, as if he'd actually listened. Gislen pulled Kaor close and hauled the guy up, only to say that Kaor still hadn't left the circle. Kaor stared right at Gislen, then turned to his men and ordered them to kill him. Without hesitating, they grabbed their weapons, ready to follow orders. But right then, they saw Julian standing in their way. He told them, cold and stern, that he'd kill anyone who dared to touch Gislen. They all froze, trembling in fear, too scared to move a muscle. Seeing this, Kaor realized how screwed he was. Shaking slightly, he turned his head and met Gislen's gaze. The kid just invited him to keep going. As the kid cocked his fist back, about to strike again, Kaor just smiled. It was like Kaor had given up resisting and was just taking the hits. In that moment, he remembered what pathetic cowards most nobles were. The moment you intimidated those arrogant narcissists, they'd start groveling. And Kaor used to enjoy emptying their pockets. That was how he earned his reputation as a mad dog, by showing off his strength. But now, he couldn't understand how he'd made such a huge mistake with this wild kid. Gislen, the ground was stained with blood, and Kaor wasn't moving at all. His men were getting worried. Then, Gislen wondered aloud if that was enough. Suddenly, he turned to the nearby mercenaries. Get bandages and compress, he ordered, explaining that if they didn't help Kaor now, he'd die. Hearing that, the mercenaries snapped out of it, ready to follow Gislen's orders. Silently, Julian turned to look at the boy. He assessed the scene with a stern look. The mercenaries were obeying Gislen's command in an instant. In the mercenary world, the fist was mightier than the law, and Gislen knew exactly how to assert his authority. When Kaor finally woke up, Gislen handed him a piece of paper. Pointing at it, he told Kaor to sign. At first, the mercenary didn't respond, just staring at Gislen. Then he clicked his tongue in disgust and signed it. When he was done, he awkwardly handed it back. But seeing this, Gislen didn't like his attitude. He found it disrespectful. Kaor involuntarily turned his head away, muttering, "Take care of us." Gislen agreed and grabbed Kaor's hand, which immediately made the beaten man flinch. But Gislen just shook it and said, "We're family now." In his mind, that meant they had to work together. A couple of days later, the mercenaries gathered on the outskirts of the Berdium lands. The mercenaries didn't get why they had to meet so early, complaining they barely had time to eat. Suddenly, one of them spoke up. He said they were being hired by the heir of the Berdium duchy. Many of them started discussing how they could just scam the guy out of his money. Young. But there were also those who listened to the conversation in silence. Suddenly, a mercenary spoke up, saying they needed a representative to communicate with this pseudo-employer. Many were surprised when they laid eyes on Gordon. The man confirmed they hadn't made any mistake, adding that he couldn't help but notice how bravely they were trying to make their lives easier. The mercenaries shot back that the last time, some idiot made inappropriate demands, so everything went down the same drain. And Gordon suggested simply not crossing the boundaries of reason. He offered himself as the representative to intimidate the employer a little, and the rest would just have to back him up. Many agreed, thinking that as long as Gordon was doing the talking, they'd have everything under control. But their conversation was abruptly cut short when someone announced that a figure was heading their way. Then, a man appeared on the horizon. It soon became clear that this lone rider was Gislen. They recognized the guy by his clothes and laughed at the fact that he came out here all alone. Gordon signaled the rest of the mercenaries with his hand, telling them to handle the atmosphere while he, himself, was going to teach the noble a harsh lesson. However, No sooner had he signaled than Gislen's companions appeared on the horizon as well. The guy had brought other mercenaries with him. By their elongated helmets, someone was able to recognize the mercenaries of the Cerberus squad. But it still wasn't clear what had happened with these rebels, seeing as they were so humble before the aristocrat. Soon, all the riders approached Gordon. Gislen slowly looked over the mercenaries in front of him with an evaluating gaze. Turning to Gordon, he asked the man if he was the leader. After receiving an affirmative answer, Gislen asked the mercenary for his name. Gordon looked at Gislen and introduced himself with hesitation. Upon hearing his name, Gislen froze for a moment and continued staring at Gordon. Then he gave Gordon a light punch and said he was impressive. Afterwards, Gislen also introduced himself, and the fact that he really was the heir of Berdium surprised everyone. Gislen wheeled his horse around and ordered all the soldiers to gather, and over his shoulder, he explained that they were going to clear the forest of monsters. Soon, Gislen was preparing for the campaign and putting on his armor. At that moment, he thought that all preparations for logging the forest were complete. A temporary base had also been established for the expedition. Supplies were provided, and the troops were ready. When Gislen had his gear on, he stepped out towards his people. Then he asked Belinda to report on the situation. It turned out they had 150 mercenaries and 40 fighters from the Cerberus squad. After listening to her, Gislen asked if she had clearly conveyed his position to Escoban. Belinda thought he would object, but the knight had even offered to cover their entry into the forest. Afterwards, Gislen ordered everyone to form a line, pointing his finger at the forest. He said they would have to cut it down. The boy said that surely everyone had heard about what lurked in this forest: monsters, secrets, and something even more terrible. Upon learning their objective, many began to worry that they might not return alive. Belinda grew indignant because they were talking during Gislen's speech, and she reprimanded the mercenaries. Gislen said he wasn't holding anyone back, but if he succeeded, he would pay triple. Hearing this, no one could believe such a payout. Belinda was immediately indignant because they had actually spent all the money on preparations, and Gislen replied that he said it to motivate himself. But he still knew that if he succeeded, it would all be worth it. Again, the boy turned to the maid and, with a smile, asked if she believed in him. Sighing deeply, the girl replied that she had to. Kaor also chuckled, noting that the promise was ridiculous and it wasn't clear how Gislen would get out of it. Then, Gislen shouted loudly, addressing his soldiers, waving his hand toward the forest. He ordered them to move out. Soon everyone got to work and started felling the forest. There was a lot of work, so even Gislen took on the task. When he cut through the tree trunk, he gave it a kick so it would fall on its own. Then he rejoiced that sunlight was finally starting to enter the forest. Addressing the people, he ordered them to keep clearing the path. Gislen remembered reading in Dolphin's notes in the past that the forest was very vast, and that one day it would be possible to expel all the evil spirits from there. But now, it was more important to focus on the money and the need to open the path to the vein, and to frustrate the people envious of Berdium. This profit was very important. Kaor realized that. Even Gislen had decided to get his hands dirty and fell the forest. The mercenaries couldn't figure out if he was setting an example or just showing off in front of them. Hearing their conversation, Belinda reprimanded them again and ordered them to get to work. She was angry about the way the mercenaries were treating their work and Gislen. Then she asked Gislen why he was working himself if he hired so many people. Because they might start to look down on him. Gislen said it didn't matter because the more people worked, the faster things would go. Belinda didn't argue with him, but she noticed that it seemed like Gislen knew everything about this place. Kaor chuckled and said the lady was worried about her employer, and that they were dogs being led to hell. At that moment, Gislen turned sharply and hit Kaor with the log he was holding in his hand. He kept walking, and an indignant Kaor asked the men if he was looking for trouble. Watching them, Gislen thought that everything had gone well so far. Dolphin, who conquered the kingdom, first focused on conquering this forest. At first, Gislen didn't understand why Dolphin had decided to focus on this place. But he learned about the fossils thanks to the notes and was able to prepare for today's expedition. But at the same time, that calm made Gislen start to worry. He only had knowledge, not experience. That's why he told everyone to remain vigilant. He also said this because the forest in front of them was becoming denser. And little by little, people started moving further away. Since it was already too dark. A mercenary thought that it was already dark. And another said the forest wasn't as scary as they said. They kept saying that it was probably just rumors. But right in the middle of their chat, Gordon froze. He stared ahead, totally shocked. After a tense silence, he finally turned back to the group. Gordon pointed out the obvious. They'd chopped down a ton of trees just to get here. Nobody got why he was bringing it up. But yeah, he was right. Then Gordon turned around and asked the real question. Where's the path back? The second he said it, everyone's face went dark. Right then, Gislen's voice cut through. Get ready. As soon as the words left his mouth, every soldier drew their weapon, but some guys didn't react. They just asked, why's everyone so tense? Gislen turned to Gordon and told him flat out, stay there, and you're dead. Gislen frowned. Back away. Slowly, Gordon didn't argue. Clutching a log, he started to turn back, but right then thwack, he accidentally smacked a nearby tree with his log. The sharp noise freaked him out so bad he dropped the wood and hit the dirt. The other soldiers jumped, calling Gordon a moron. But Gordon was the most terrified of them all. He whipped his head around, staring at the trees. Nothing happened. Dead silence. But the others stayed on guard. They could feel it now. Something was definitely wrong. Gislen stayed quiet, watching, waiting for the other shoe to drop. But even in a mess like this, some people just have too much confidence. One mercenary scoffed, saying the client was scared of every little twig snap. He pointed ahead. Look, guys, it's nothing but trees. Gislen frowned. Get back here, now, or you're both dead. But the guy just asked Gislen why he was trying to scare everyone. He thought Gislen was just doing it to control them. But right then, something thick coiled around his waist. Before he could even process it, he was yanked backward into the dark. Gislen knew you couldn't sense these monsters until it was too late. Nobody could have predicted what was coming for them unless they knew exactly what they were facing. If you don't spot them instantly, you're just food. Gislen shouted to the group. That thing is a dinosaur. Turns out, they were already surrounded. Terrified, the bandits scrambled, trying to run for their lives. Nobody wanted to end up as Monster Chow. So they bolted. But the monsters were watching. Vines and branches lashed out at them. In a split second, several mercenaries were snatched up and dragged straight into the monster's gaping maws. The only one they missed was Gordon. He'd miraculously grabbed onto a rock. One of his buddies rushed over. Hold on, he yelled. Raising his axe to cut the branch, he swung the axe hard. Crack. But the branch didn't break. The axe did. Before he could figure out what to do, Gordon's grip slipped. He was being dragged away. He screamed in terror. And the others just watched, helpless. But then, Gislen charged in. He raised his sword, wrapped in blue mana, and sliced clean through the branch. He spun in midair and slashed the monster right in the eye. Blood gushed out, and both he and Gordon hit the ground hard. Everyone saw it. The eyes. That was the weak spot. Gislen roared. Pull it together. He ordered them to group up. Shields up. Don't let those vines get through. Focus on defense. Wait for my signal. Reacting fast. Everyone locked their shields in place. Gislen spotted Kaor. Where are the oil lamps? Once he saw them, he barked the order. Throw them at the monsters. Burn them. Meanwhile, the soldiers were panicking, staring down the monsters, waiting for the perfect second. Gislen yelled. Now, they started hurling the lanterns at the beasts, but the monsters swatted the lanterns away with their vines. The mercenaries froze, realizing they'd never set them on fire like this. Once the lanterns were down, the monsters lashed out with their vines again. Suddenly, Gislen swooped in, slicing through the vines like butter. And Belinda wasn't just going to stand there watching. Either, she took aim, spun, and buried her daggers right in a monster's eye. Gislen shouted to Belinda and Gislen, "Cover the others. Get them ready to throw the lamps again. I'll draw their fire." Belinda looked worried. "Be careful." Vines shot at him from everywhere. But Gislen sliced them apart. The monsters didn't stop, though. He had to keep moving, dodging constantly to avoid getting snagged. As he pushed forward, he noticed something. The monster had legs. Everyone gasped, thinking he was about to get stomped flat. But Gislen was faster. He slashed through the monster's leg in one go. He leaped up and drove his blade straight into its eye. While he kept the monster busy, Belinda turned to the soldiers. "Throw the lamps now." They didn't hesitate. They hurled the lamps. And this time, the monsters couldn't block them. The oil ignited instantly. The mercenaries cheered. Seeing the flames take hold, Gislen whipped around. "Don't stop. Keep attacking." Soon, the whole forest was blazing. The mercenaries stood there, stunned. They'd actually beaten them, but then the worry set in. The fire was going to consume the whole forest. Gordon was just happy that those wooden freaks burned so easily. But Gislen cut them off. "Don't lower your guard. It's not over." He looked grim. Now, they reveal their true form. And just as he said it, steam began to rise from nowhere. Seeing the steam rising, everyone immediately assumed the monsters had managed to put out the fire. Meanwhile, Belinda and Gislen made their way over to Gislen. When Belinda asked what was going on, the young man explained that only the monsters' shells were immune to fire. But when the flames hit their watery cores, it created steam, exposing their true forms. The monsters opened their mouths and let out piercing screams. Seeing the beasts were still alive, the soldiers panicked, their fear drawing the monsters' attention. Gislen raised his sword high and shouted for everyone to grab their weapons, slashing his sword down and scattering the steam. Gislen declared the battle started now, then charged straight in. Seeing him rush forward so bravely, everyone else froze in shock. They had thought he was just all talk when he said fighting these monsters would be easy. But Kaor didn't hesitate. He sprinted forward with the Cerberus squad, laughing that they could finally get into the fight. Gordon even watched his maid run ahead, looking worried about Gislen. Right then, Gislen yelled at the mercenaries, asking why they were frozen. He told them sternly that this was Gislen's order, which meant they had to trust him and act. The mercenaries were surprised at first, but then they decided to join the fray. They believed Gislen could still turn this around. Since the monster's shells were burnt, Gislen shouted that they couldn't survive without mana. He told his men that standing before them were just giant scarecrows they could kill with a single blow. The next few hours were pure chaos. Gislen knew that uncertainty would lead to their deaths. His job was to crush the doubts of those following him, so he kept pushing forward, slaughtering monsters. He had to instill faith in his people so they could turn the impossible into the possible. When the last monster fell, silence dropped instantly. Everyone was breathing hard, whispering in disbelief about how they had actually defeated them. Without turning back to the soldiers, Gislen ordered everyone to form a line. There was a loud shuffling of feet, and instantly, all the soldiers aligned behind him. Gislen announced that even at the very entrance of the forest, there were swarms of monsters. Hearing this, everyone was terrified to imagine what lay ahead. But Gislen kept speaking, telling no one to worry. Addressing them directly, he said he would always be the first one in. That's why he asked them to trust him and follow. Looking at Gislen, all the mercenaries stood frozen. deeply impressed. Then, they continued moving. They advanced, clearing the forest as they went. Whenever they encountered monsters, they fought them off. After the battles, Belinda healed Gislen's wounds. She fussed over him, slightly undermining the strong leader's authority. At one point, they ran into a monster that looked like a massive rat. Seeing it, everyone got alarmed, wondering when they'd stop running into these things. However, Kaor and Gislen didn't lose their cool and stepped right in front of them. In one smooth move, Kaor closed the distance with the rat and sliced off one of its legs. The rat started to lose its balance and fall, but it still aimed for the people below. Gislen blocked its teeth with his shield, and Gislen finished it off with a precise strike. Gislen asked if everyone was safe, and they said yes. Then, one of the mercenaries told the others to stay close to their boss if they didn't want to die. Gislen noted they were making good progress, and Kaor added that practice was the best teacher. After a brief skirmish, Gislen told everyone to keep cutting down trees. But among them, there was one mercenary who was more scared than the rest. Looking at the others, the only thing he could think was that this place was full of crazy people. Soon, the mercenaries reached the lake. Seeing the water, everyone ran toward it and started drinking greedily. But Belinda wasn't sure if it was safe. Ignoring her concerns, Gislen thought that everything was going according to plan so far. This lake was the main landmark on the way to their goal, so he decided to set up camp here. While talking amongst themselves, the men noticed that the last 2 nights had been quiet. When Manhwa suggested they slip away quietly, the mercenaries were outraged. But he tried to explain that it wasn't worth risking their lives like this, because life couldn't be bought with any amount of money. Gordon argued that according to the employer, the target was close, so it made no sense to leave now. But Manhwa was furious that everyone believed him. He assumed Gislen just wanted to curry favor by forcing them to clear this forest. Another mercenary pointed out they had already received an advance, and the purpose of mercenaries was to do what they were paid for. Manhwa agreed that Gislen fought well, but he still believed they had just gotten lucky. He was sure that, when the situation got too dangerous, Gislen would use them as cannon fodder. Everyone fell silent because they understood that was a possibility. Manhwa intended to keep sowing discord, since trying to break through the monsters alone would just be suicide. But suddenly, a mercenary spoke up, saying that without their employer, they would have died a long time ago. Pointing at Gislen, he was personally healing the wounds of the mercenaries and giving them advice on treatment. Belinda thought he should save the expensive medicine for himself, but Gislen said they brought this ointment to use it. After treating one person, Gislen called for the next. The mercenary asked Manhwa if Gislen would waste expensive medicine on them if he was just going to use them as cannon fodder. The others agreed there was no sign Gislen planned to abandon them. Manhwa was pissed that this mercenary had ruined everything for him. Gislen told the others to stop chatting and get some rest, then turned to Gislen and Kaor, saying they needed to talk. Kaor asked if everything was okay, adding that, if he were Gislen, he would have ripped Manhwa's tongue out. However, he told them to forget it because they had something more important to discuss. Gislen realized that, as he expected, there were fewer lights. Since they entered the forest, monsters had been attacking day and night, but the last 2 nights had been strangely quiet. Hearing this, the others got lost in thought. Gislen realized they had wandered straight into the territory of the night monsters. Gislen confirmed her hunch, then headed back to the quiet camp and calmly dropped the bomb. They were in grave danger. Just as things settled down and everyone drifted off. Asterisk, crack asterisk. Gordon snapped his eyes open. A lamp was flying right at him. He scrambled back just in time. He didn't get hit, but then he felt it. Something heavy on his shoulder. A scream ripped through the air, waking everyone up. They saw Gordon swinging his axe like a madman, trying to scare off something. He was trying to fight off monsters only he could see. The group rushed over. "What the hell are you doing?" Gordon yelled back. Panicked. The monster. It's right in front of me. Nobody had a clue what he was talking about. There's nothing there. Man. Gordon looked back. Eyes wide. He couldn't believe it. They started walking away, figuring Gordon was just having a nightmare. But then other mercenaries stepped up. It wasn't a dream. One of them felt a weird presence and saw a lantern just vanish. The mercenaries huddled up, whispering about the creepy stuff happening that night. We're not alone out here, one guy insisted. Gislen nodded. He's right. The crowd parted as Gislen stepped forward. Gislen ordered everyone to group up. While he hashed out the plan inside the tent, the mercenaries gathered outside, waiting. Gordon was shocked. Surrounded. We haven't even seen them, Gislen explained. This is my specialty. He suspected that they had been hunted ever since the lake. These were monsters that ruled the night. Fallers can merge with the shadows. Physical attacks won't touch them. The mercenaries gasped when they heard these things move through shadows and devoured light. Belinda finally understood why the lanterns were disappearing. Kaor wanted to strike first, but Gislen shook his head. No. We wait for them to attack, Belinda asked. Can we really afford to wait? Gislen replied. If we attack blindly in the dark, we'll just provoke them. Gislen was surprised to hear there was actually a way to beat them. Meanwhile, Belinda had already passed out the scrolls that Gislen had prepared. Now, Gislen laid out the battle plan. The Fallers are smashing our lights to box us in. We're outnumbered, so we can't defend the whole perimeter. Gislen pointed out. We're near the lake, so they can't flank us from there. Exactly. We're not surrounded on all sides. It's not hopeless. Gislen grinned. We have the initiative. Everyone was stunned. Asterisk initiative times, Gislen suggested splitting the team into 3 groups. Defense squad. Hold the line. Crossbows. Keep them back. My combat squad will launch the assault. Shields and crossbows. Don't let them break the center while you hold them. The combat unit will hit hard from the left flank. We pinch them against the center and crush them. Kaor thought. Asterisk, if the center holds? This works. But Belinda cut in. Wait. You said attacking in the dark is useless. How do we fight them? Silence. Everyone looked at Gislen. Kaor shrugged. Maybe we use mana. Gislen waved it off. Don't worry about that. We have magic scrolls. Soon, everyone was in position, and the monsters began their attack. The last lantern died. Darkness. The monsters closed in. Gislen stepped forward, remembering the entry in Dolphin's diary. Asterisk. They can't stand the light. Asterisk. Expose them to light, and they reveal themselves. Now Gislen shouted. Everyone ripped their scrolls. Streaks of light shot into the sky. The monsters looked up, terrified, and then flash times, blinding light flooded the area. The monsters roared in pain. Writhing in the glare, the shadows melted away. Their true forms were revealed. As the light dimmed slightly, the monsters lunged forward. The crossbowmen didn't flinch. They locked onto the targets, ready to fire. They unleashed a volley, following orders to hold the line until the last second. Gislen gripped his sword. It was time. You can see them now attack. He swung his sword wide, signaling the combat squad. The men roared and charged. Gislen led the way, the first to slice through a monster. Asterisk. They merge with darkness, but their bodies are weak. Asterisk. Knowing this, he ordered. Wipe them out. Don't leave a single one standing. Gislen danced around their attacks. Kaor was hacking through them, but there were just too many for one man. Belinda stepped up, covering him. Her job was to blast a hole in the enemy line. She fired, then turned to Gislen. The guy was already there, moving like a blur, ready to strike. Asterisk / times. With one swing, Gislen took out a dozen monsters. He knew he had Berdium's finest warriors backing him up. They followed his orders without hesitation, slaughtering the enemy. But the Fowlers kept coming. Where are they all coming from? The mercenaries were losing ground. The defense line was breaking. Just as they were about to be overrun, Gislen and his squad crashed through. After cutting down the monsters, Gislen shouted, "Good work." Seeing him, the men cheered. With Gislen there, they knew they wouldn't lose. "Widen the formation," Gislen commanded. "Surround them on all sides." Under the enemy's pressure, the Fallora started trying to flee. When the mercenaries saw this, they were caught off guard. Gislen frowned, realizing the fours were smart enough not to wait for an ambush. He immediately ordered Belinda to find their leader, the one with horns on its head. She suggested just letting the monsters go. But Gislen shot back that they'd just keep chasing them until they dropped from exhaustion. And since they couldn't handle another fight, Gislen wanted to end it right here and now. Hearing that, Belinda fell silent at first, realizing how much Gislen had changed. But she snapped out of it and accepted the order. She threw a grappling hook, coiling it around a tree branch. She launched herself off the ground, soaring into the air. That gave her enough height to see every single monster. Finally, she spotted her target. She took aim instantly, intending to bind it. Thanks to her precision, the rope wrapped tight around the leader's neck. She called out to Gislen that she'd got him. Hearing the signal, Gislen readied himself for the kill. With a single strike, he cut through the mob of monsters and slashed the leader with his sword. It was a critical hit, causing the beast to bleed out profusely. In its final moments, the monster shrieked in pain before Gislen sliced it clean in half. When the other followers saw that, they shrieked too. But they didn't dare attack Gislen. With the leader dead, Gislen ordered them to wipe out the rest. Everyone charged forward, not wanting to lose out on the glory. The battle raged on until dawn. It was only then that Gislen killed the last Failure. Everyone had fought well, so Gislen praised them all. Realizing they'd won, everyone shouted for joy. They couldn't have been happier with the victory. Those closest to Gislen asked if he was all right. Gislen praised them back and asked Belinda to do a head count. He also ordered the Cerberus squad to scatter the monster corpses around the camp to ward off other beasts. Gislen explained to Kaoru that since the Fowlers were apex predators, this was the best way to protect themselves. But Kaoru was pissed that Gislen was treating him like an idiot. Gislen reflected that they'd been in the forest for over 10 days. Now that they'd defeated the Fallers, all that was left was to reach the rune stones. With that thought, he watched the sunrise, hardly believing their journey was nearing its end. Then Belinda reported that 3 people were missing, though the Cerberus squad hadn't suffered any losses. Smiling, Kaoru said that with a commander like theirs, it wasn't surprising. Still, it was unclear where the 3 men had gone. Since there weren't even any bodies, Gordon realized Manus was missing, but they couldn't find his body either. Another mercenary remarked that running from a fight was just like Manus. Honestly, he wasn't even surprised. The deserters told Manus that if they hadn't run, they would have definitely died in that battle. And when the others wanted to slow down, Manus told them they needed to keep running while the main group distracted the monsters. But right then, they all froze, staring off in the same direction. They ignored Manus, which pissed him off. Finally, one of them managed to raise a hand and point into the distance. When Manus turned around, he saw a massive monster staring right at them. Manus was absolutely terrified. It was the biggest monster he'd ever seen in his life. The snake didn't take its eyes off them, staring down at the snack that had just delivered itself. Meanwhile, Gislen's squad continued on their path. Kaoru was suddenly surprised that everyone was working without asking questions. It was the first time he'd seen the mercenaries work together in such perfect harmony. Gislen teased Kaoru again, saying they were actually doing a good job. Unlike some people, Kaoru shot back that it would be a shame if the mercenaries disbanded after the mission. But Gislen said he'd hire them as his personal guard. It was widely believed that mercenaries couldn't defeat a regular army. However, thanks to their recent experience. These guys had gone way beyond the average level. Then Kaoru's men came back and reported they'd scattered the corpses everywhere. Kaoru noted that it really seemed to be working, since they hadn't run into any monsters yet. But Gislen stayed constantly on guard, hoping his worries were just paranoia. Just then, Belinda approached him. She was scouting ahead and, as it turned out, she'd actually found something. Gislen was surprised by the news. He immediately ordered everyone to double-time it. And soon they reached their destination. The mercenaries were left speechless by the surprise. Gislen calmly stated that this was their mission objective. Before them, finally, lay the runestone vein. Kaoru was shocked that something so valuable was out here. But Gislen reminded him that everything had been calculated. Belinda, delighted, asked how Gislen knew about it. Many couldn't believe they were seeing runestones in such massive quantities. Suddenly, a man appeared and told them they wouldn't be going any further. Gislen grew cautious the moment he saw him. The man, looking like the Walking Dead, said it was all over. Then he collapsed, which put the mercenaries on edge. They recognized Manus and rushed toward him. But Gislen stopped them immediately. Then, the guy told everyone to retreat. With that, he swung his sword vigorously, dispersing the smoke in the area. When the haze cleared, everyone saw countless bones scattered across the ground. Seeing such a gruesome sight, everyone was shocked, wondering what the hell had happened here. Everyone went on high alert. Gislen said they'd have to work for these stones. Judging by the scale of the carnage, there was a very powerful monster nearby. However, Gislen didn't remember any mention of this in Dolphin's diary. He turned to give an order, but didn't have time to finish. He saw a massive python staring right at him. Without giving them a chance to react, the snake opened its jaws and hissed. Gislen ordered everyone to scatter, and the others spun around at the noise. By then, Gislen had already lunged forward, just as the python tried to swallow him whole. But he slipped past the jaws and struck the serpent right in the head, leaping onto its body. He kicked off with his legs and lunged straight for its skull. Yet, that powerful strike barely left a scratch. The others were shocked. Not even magic could pierce those scales. Meanwhile, the python tried to swallow him whole again. But Gislen struck its fangs, causing venom to spray everywhere. Seeing the poison coming, Gislen managed to dodge the spray just in time. But the moment he turned back to the python, he saw it was ready to strike. Gislen went on high alert. He managed to react and block the blow, but the python pinned him to the ground with its tail. Seeing this, Belinda started to panic for the boy. The snake kept twisting, and everything collapsed under its massive weight. The mercenaries went on the defensive, trying to dodge the strikes. Belinda and Gislen helped the others get to safety. The only sounds reaching Gislen were the screams of the mercenaries trying to escape. He finally understood who owned those stones. But he never expected the owner to be a python. Usually, pythons stayed deep in the forest, so Gislen never expected to run into one here. But now he knew they wouldn't last long against it. But at the same time, there was no time to retreat and prepare a new expedition. After all, if they retreated now, the whole journey would be meaningless. Gislen told the python to get out of his way. He had a heavy responsibility to bear. Awakening his mana cores, Gislen braced for battle. The python snapped at him viciously, but the boy dodged it, ducking past the jaws. Gislen slashed the python's mouth and managed to cut one of its eyes. But the moment he did, the python lashed out with its tail. Gislen reacted fast, blocking with his sword. But the snake's weight was too heavy for him. The serpent hissed menacingly. The python kept attacking, but Gislen blocked every single strike. He didn't care how slim his chances of winning were. His sense of duty wouldn't let him stop this crucial fight. In that moment, all eyes were fixed on Gislen. Everyone watched intently as he fought the python all alone. The fight was draining the boy's strength fast. Still, both he and the python stood frozen, staring each other down. Gislen knew his mana would run dry before he could kill the beast. Then he heard voices behind him. Everyone rushed over to Gislen, asking if he was hurt. Belinda begged Gislen to retreat, promising him that they would hold off the python. But Gislen told them to stay back, which shocked everyone. Confused, they asked him why. Gislen also asked what he meant. Gislen explained that he couldn't protect them from a monster like this right now, and he couldn't afford to lose them all. When asked what would happen to him, Gislen said he could handle the python himself. Belinda knew it was a miracle they were even alive, but she didn't understand why Gislen was going this far. Just then, the python opened its jaws again, and venom shot out from its mouth. When that happened, Gislen screamed for everyone to run. But to his surprise, they all rushed forward and blocked the venom. Gislen never expected the mercenaries to defend him. Then they told him they were fighting together. The mercenaries said they'd never met an employer as noble as Gislen. Kaor even suggested they just kill the snake so he could take all the treasure for himself. Gislen volunteered to distract the snake and create an opening in its defense. They all asked him to trust them, just as they had trusted Gislen before. Hearing this, Gislen stayed silent. Then, to everyone's surprise, he started listing the snake's advantages. It was huge, poisonous, had hard scales, and if they missed an attack, they'd die instantly. Belinda was moved hearing this. Gislen continued, saying the snake was wounded now and one eye was damaged. And after this expedition, they were bound to return together. When the mercenaries heard that, a fighting spirit ignited within them. The snake opened its mouth wide and lunged at them. The soldiers held the line, and the strong warriors charged straight at the serpent. Kaor managed to inflict a wound on the beast. Feeling the pain, the snake started screeching and thrashing wildly. In that moment, Gislen attacked and knocked it to the ground with her strength. Before the snake could get its bearings, Gislen aimed for its second eye. The python had no time to react, and Gislen's attack landed perfectly. Gislen knew that even with a perfect strategy, things could go wrong. But if he gave up, the whole village would die. And he couldn't let that happen. Once the snake was blinded, he leaped up, ready to finish what he started. He carried a heavy responsibility because he knew the future. But in that instant, the python swallowed him whole. Seeing this, everyone feared for Gislen. However, a sword immediately pierced through the snake's skin. As he started to move, he sliced through the snake's body, covered in venom. Gislen managed to escape from the snake's mouth. When the others saw this, they cheered for their leader. Gislen was the future of Berdium. Meanwhile, back at the castle, they were discussing Gislen's grave crime. They were angry because the kid thought he was a lord and did whatever he wanted. Another count asked what the point of being outraged was when the boy had already been in the forest for 2 weeks. If Escoban hadn't lied, they would have stopped Gislen a long time ago. Lord Berdium listened silently to his advisor's outrage. He remained silent, but his face looked grim as he thought about his son. Suddenly, someone entered and approached the man. The knight said they had to see it with their own eyes. Everyone was shocked when he announced that Gislen had returned. Meanwhile, the boy was heading toward his castle. Soon, he found himself in the same room with the other counts. Everyone, including Gislen's father, looked at the boy sadly, waiting for his reaction. First, Gislen greeted his father. In response, he only reminded him that he had forbidden hunting monsters in the forest. Gislen apologized, claiming he had no choice. But the others, they were furious. They didn't think that was a good enough reason to disobey a direct order. The knight was seething. It wasn't just about Gislen's life, it was the risk. Monsters could have surged out of that forest and started slaughtering people. But Gislen just shot back that he was still alive. And look around, no monster invasion. That insolence made them lose it. Suddenly, one of them snapped, asking if Gislen thought this was funny. Then he added, "Oh, So, just because it worked out, we should just turn a blind eye. Still, the man insisted there was no excuse. Gislen took the paper they handed him and realized it was from Railed County. Turns out, the Count got worried after Gislen's visit to Amelia. He found out what went down over there. And then, he said Gislen had pissed off Count Rolled. So, the engagement was off. And they were cutting all support. Gislen thought to himself that the letter looked real enough. He figured Amelia was willing to team up with the enemy just to destroy him. But this meant he couldn't pressure her anymore. If Gislen had been late, he would have been trapped inside the mansion. Time was definitely not on his side. The man asked if Gislen had anything to say for himself. Others demanded the money be returned to the Rifles, whining that that amount could have lasted them a long time. Then Gislen dropped the bomb he'd spent it all. He explained the money went into an expedition to the monster forest. Dead silence followed. One of them asked nervously, "You spent?" Every single penny on that. Gislen just said he was sorry and had no excuse. Suddenly, someone grabbed him by the collar. They screamed at him, asking what kind of heir destroys his own county with his own hands. Another one chimed in, saying Gislen wasn't an heir anymore, he was a criminal. But Gislen cut them off. He said he would personally fund the mansion's needs now. His father asked what the hell that meant. That's when Gislen called for Belinda. As the girl placed something on the table, Gislen told them he didn't go to the forest just for a stroll. When the box opened, everyone's expression changed. Gislen presented them with high-quality runestones. They couldn't believe their eyes. The shocked men assumed Gislen bought them with Amelia's money. But he corrected them. He'd found a vein of stones in the forest. One man argued that the money from this one stone still wouldn't be enough to sustain the mansion. Gislen chuckled and agreed. True. But this was far from the only stone he had. Outside, work was non-stop. Mercenaries were hauling stones. Everyone was stunned that the guy had mined this much in just 2 weeks. Belinda confirmed it was all from the expedition. And besides the stones, they also secured the remains of that giant serpent. Gislen said that everything he did was for the good of the county. They told Gislen's father this would be enough to keep them afloat. Everyone was shocked to realize they didn't have to struggle to survive anymore. Just then, someone put their hands on Gislen's shoulders. And then, they started praising him, asking if he was tired from all that work. Suddenly, he told them he had a few conditions. He demanded the release of Escoban and Ricardo. They were just following orders. Also, access to the monster forest had to be open to everyone. Any unnecessary rumors would damage the county. And everyone agreed on that. Finally, the boy said he would personally lead the service and recruit mercenaries. But they found it unacceptable that Gislen wanted to form his own private army. They tried to explain that he should be apologizing. Yet here he was demanding total freedom. But Gislen shot back that he was creating a way for them to never depend on the Rifles again. And if their petty complaints delayed the work, it would hurt the county's finances. They turned to Gislen's father, begging him to object. Right then, someone interrupted the conversation. The mercenaries walked up and saluted Gislen. Jillian asked for orders, since the loading was almost done. And Kaor asked what to do with the python's remains. Gislen told them to separate the poison, blood, meat, and skin immediately to stop them from rotting. Randolph remarked that the number of mercenaries Gislen had was impressive. They couldn't understand how young Gislen managed to unite such strong people. Watching his son, the Lord stayed silent. At that moment, Gislen turned to look at them too. The father told his son it must have been hard to tame those mercenaries. He listened to Gislen's reply. Without the mercenaries, none of this would have worked. Then the father turned around and told everyone to go back. He told Gislen he'd turn a blind eye this time, but warned him about the consequences if he disobeyed orders again. Gislen thanked his father for that. Finally, he said that one day, this mansion would belong to Gislen, and that he truly held the spirit of the Northern Wolf. The Northern Wolf was a title granted to someone who defended the northern border of the Kingdom of Ludania. No one was close to Gislen's father. His military power was insignificant. But he kept fighting, losing his wife and son in the process. And as a reward for his efforts, he only received a miserable death. The work was done, and everyone planned to rest. Gislen told everyone to get ready, since they might leave at any moment. But they begged him not to rush, he needed to rest. Belinda said they had worked hard to purge the poison from his body. But the boy just turned to her and said he was counting on her. Then he walked away from them. Moving forward, the news that they had mined the stones would spread fast. That's why Gislen wanted to strengthen his power, to become so strong that no one would even think of attacking him. But with that thought, he collapsed to the ground, completely drained. Soon, the news spread through the whole area. The partial development of the monster forest was confirmed. We needed to start a war with the Durgats and wipe out Berdium. There was a lot of noise about this at the meeting. No one knew how many of their people were still left in those lands. Then someone reported there were 2 vassals and a knight. If the Prince of Grad dies on Berdium territory, it'll trigger a territorial war. Sam is in charge of this operation. Hearing that, everyone was shocked. They didn't expect the trump card to be revealed so soon. Someone objected, saying the decision felt too rushed. But then they were told everything had changed because of the monster forest. Dolphin was the one calling the shots, so questioning his orders was pointless. Then Desmond told everyone to prepare for war and asked if anyone else was up to speed on the current situation. Amelia was hysterical when she found out what happened. She buried her face in her assistant's shoulder and sobbed. The girl was overcome with emotion at the fact that Gislen had done everything with his own money. She also had to humble herself before her father to get him to stop supporting Berdium. But the man replied that she didn't look like herself. Hearing this, the girl sighed and admitted she'd let her emotions get the better of her. But she accepted that what's done is done. And the knight asked Amelia to give the order. He said that with the Mind Stones, Berdium would soon emerge from its financial crisis. But the most important thing was that they hadn't managed to sell the stones yet. They also discovered the stones recently, so we might still have time before they sell them. Amelia said there was only one place in the north where they could sell the stones, and that was the Great Crimson Tower. Stones were needed for research, and magic towers took their supplies very seriously. Now, the target wasn't Gislen anymore, but the workers transporting the stones. The man replied that there were 2 towers in the north, so it didn't make sense to concentrate power on just one. Amelia shot back that Gislen wouldn't get involved with that Times Tower, since they had already lost their grandeur. Now she was going to take everything from Gislen. Meanwhile, the guy lay unconscious. As he slept, he remembered what had happened. He recalled finding himself inside the python. Before the predator swallowed its prey, it would start secreting poison from its inner lining to soften the victim. His mana burned the poison on contact, but the toxic fumes didn't disappear. As a result, many lost consciousness or died right then and there. Gislen tried to stay awake because he knew if he didn't, it would all be over. Everything he held dear depended on this expedition. If he couldn't avoid the poisoning, he was going to take control of it. The poison entering his body was concentrated in mana, and he wanted to neutralize it by rotating the mana in his core. Gislen managed to convert the poison into an alternative fuel that could withstand a mana explosion. At that moment, the boy woke up. He immediately realized he was alive. As he sat up, he wondered what had happened, his mind still hazy. Then, his gaze fell on his sister. As soon as Gislen woke up, she ran to hug her brother. She said Gislen left, and when he came back, he lost consciousness. But now Elena was just happy he was okay. For a moment, Gislen stayed silent in surprise. When he wanted to say something, the girl pushed him away abruptly and ran out of the room, screaming that Gislen had woken up. Gislen frowned, realizing he had been lying there like that for 2 days. He tried to hold on as long as possible, but his young body couldn't handle the strain. Still, his body remained in good shape. That kind of regeneration shouldn't be possible in 2 days. His regeneration had improved, and his mana volume had increased. It seemed to Gislen that the very nature of his mana had changed. He immediately thought the mana had mixed with the python's energy. He didn't know before that one could get stronger this way. Turns out, the risk to his life was justified. And if Gislen was thinking correctly, he would become 10 times stronger. But he decided to get back to business. In 2 days, everyone should already know about the existence of the stones. So, Gislen decided to urgently gather mercenaries. When someone knocked on the door, Gislen told Belinda to come in. But it wasn't just Belinda who entered, his father did too. Dad was happy. Gislen was awake. Gislen was surprised when he saw him. The man went on to say that Belinda had told him about the battle with the python, and he was glad Gislen remained safe. Belinda asked again if everything was okay, since he had suddenly lost consciousness. But Lord Berdium interrupted them and told Gislen, "We need to talk." Turns out, he had some kind of request for Gislen. Gislen was a bit stunned to hear it. Soon, they met where Gislen usually trained. For the first time, Gislen found himself in a situation where he and his father were on a training ground together. In the past, he tried to avoid his father so he wouldn't get scolded. His father apologized for calling Gislen out so early. But the boy replied that it was fine, and then asked what the request was. His father looked at him in silence, then looked away, also in silence, remembering his mother's words. Gislen wondered if this was what she had meant. A long time ago, she told him his father wasn't the most open person. Gislen was surprised she spoke about his father like that. His mother continued, saying that his father believed he had to be a support for everyone, so he constantly hid his feelings. The only exception was the moment he confessed to her. That's why she asked Gislen to understand his father, even if he seemed cold. After all, he was just a man who didn't know how to express his feelings. Gislen tensed up when his father asked him to raise his sword. But he didn't object and got ready to fight. Without any signal, they engaged in combat. Lord Berdium attacked first, but Gislen blocked the blow. Then, both began to constantly maneuver and counterattack. Gislen also confidently blocked his father's attacks. Having created some distance, they froze for a moment. Gislen noticed his father's sword was very heavy. That sword was powerful enough to crush many enemies, but at the same time thin enough to defend with. It became a deadly weapon in the hands of a veteran. The Lord struck with everything he had. But Gislen parried and was about to counter. But the man managed to block it. The two opponents locked eyes. Both of them were inches away from victory. They had their swords at each other's throats. But it was a draw. Then, his father spoke up, saying Gislen had really grown. Gislen thanked him, but tensed up when he saw his father wanted to add something. His father told him he needed to suppress his pressure when crossing swords with someone. Otherwise, his intentions would be too obvious to his opponent. Gislen thought about that. He always tried to predict the enemy's moves, but he suddenly realized this was the first time anyone had ever given him a proper lesson. His swordsmanship was forged in battle. It was instinctive. He'd never had formal training, so he might have missed a few basics. Gislen had always relied only on himself. But it felt nice having someone teach him. With that in mind, he thanked his father again. The man looked sternly at his son, telling him it was a reprimand. Regardless of Gislen's achievements, he wanted his son to follow the rules. Gislen understood that without rules, everything would descend into chaos. Finally, his father said that Gislen had changed a lot. Gislen's perspective broadened. So, his father told him to keep up that same spirit. Gislen couldn't help but think about the heavy duty resting on his shoulders. It was obvious he had to protect the people of his lands. But then he remembered his father had a request. There was a silence. His father hesitated, but finally, awkwardly asked if Gislen had any spare cash. The mercenary camp was set up near the monster forest. When Gislen got back, he asked how everyone was doing. They all answered in unison that everything was great. They asked about his condition, but he was already feeling better. Suddenly, he asked Jillian about Rachel's condition. The man didn't answer right away. He never expected his daughter to recover, so he was incredibly grateful. Gislen was genuinely happy for him. And then, he decided to tell them something. He told them his estate was in grave danger. When they heard that, they were shocked. Gislen explained how Elena was attacked, how they wanted to start a war this way, how he found the dying Prince of Grad, and about the forces setting their sights on Berdium. He thought they'd been followed for a long time, and that there was a spy in the estate. Now Belinda understood the rush, and Kaor said life with Gislen was never boring. Jillian said the estate was a perfect target right now. It was weak, but held a lot of mana stones. Gislen agreed. Belinda suggested telling everyone as soon as possible. Gislen refused. If Elena had been betrayed by her knights, then there had been a spy among the vassals for a long time, and after discovering the stone, they'd definitely be attacked soon. The boy said a hard battle was waiting for them. Silence fell over the group. Kaor told Gislen to just give the order. He smiled and said things certainly wouldn't be boring with them. Jillian said they'd already entrusted him with their lives, so they were ready to follow him to the end. Belinda agreed. She wanted to protect Gislen too. The boy chuckled at their enthusiasm. Their greatest enemy was the Duke of the End, along with Desmond and Amelia under his command. Gislen told everyone they were heading to the Scarlet Flame Tower. Belinda asked why not the Crimson Tower, since they offered better prices there. Gislen replied that they'd have fewer problems with the Scarlet Flame Tower. Jillian agreed, figuring they'd probably be attacked otherwise. Gislen knew the Scarlet Flame Tower was trying to restore its former glory. But there was another important reason he chose it. There was a mage in the Scarlet Flame Tower, a girl waiting for the light her master said would shine upon them. Soon, they all arrived at the location. The mercenaries were amazed by the towering structure. They were also surprised by the city. It was on a whole different level compared to Berdium. Mages were visible everywhere on the streets. The mercenaries stared. They'd never seen so much magic before. The mages' expressions darkened when they saw the mercenaries, and they all started casting spells at once. Then, everyone watched as the mages simply vanished. The mercenaries were shocked and shouted out in surprise. Gislen realized they didn't seem to be welcome, even though things were going badly in the tower. Belinda noted that it looked fine. Gislen agreed that everything seemed normal, but said this place would soon fall into ruin. Everyone commented on the size of the tower, but they finally reached it. Suddenly, Belinda realized there were no guards, just armor lying on the ground. Suddenly, a voice called out from above. At that moment, the armor began to move and block their path. The mages forbade travelers from entering the tower, then demanded they state their names and business. The armor was being controlled remotely. That was obvious, since the mages never exposed themselves. Gislen told the mages that the heir of Berdium stood before them, and demanded to speak to the person in charge of trade. But the mages replied that they weren't buying anything. Belinda was outraged. They hadn't even looked at the merchandise. The mage retorted that Berdium was a poor land, and nothing of value could come from there, then decided to kick the travelers out. The girl got angry, and told the mages to get down there fast. They asked Gislen what to do, but he remained silent. He asked the mage if they were sure they wouldn't buy it. After showing the stone, he said the mages would surely know what it was. The mage was shocked when he saw the stone. Seeing its light, he was convinced it was a rune stone. He realized exactly what they had brought to sell. With a smile, Gislen asked if they would buy it. Soon enough, they apologized for their behavior. The sales manager introduced himself to Gislen. Gislen said they had a huge shipment and needed someone capable to handle the deal. Hearing what he was asking for, someone who looked just as powerful as the Tower Master, the manager was stunned. He agreed to pass the message to the bishop and asked for the guests to be moved to another room. Belinda asked with a smirk if it was really worth insulting other people's territory. But suddenly, they heard a noise. In response to Gislen's question, the man replied that everything was fine. They were told such sounds were normal during magic research. When the guy opened the door, the room was thick with smoke. He was pissed off because he'd explicitly forbidden the girl from coming here. He chuckled, mocking her for demanding a position as a researcher when she couldn't even use magic. The mages couldn't understand how they could accept a girl like that. Breathing hard, she tried to object, saying she had a right to visit the lab too. But he just smirked at her claim that she was a mage. Suddenly, he decided to humor her, saying if she was right, she should be able to use protection spells. So now, he wanted her to block his attack. Seeing this, the girl froze in fear. The flame was already rushing toward her. She reached out, desperate to cast a protection spell, but she failed. Terrified. Just then, someone stepped in front of her. With a swing of his sword, Gislen scattered the attack. The mages stared in shock. Gislen asked if this was how they conducted research. He was furious at the tower's methods. The master was shocked to learn they were running out of runestones. He said this would only widen the gap between them and the Crimson Tower, reminding him that he'd ordered reserve stones to be bought. The mages felt that every time they asked for funds, they were denied. Yet the money always seemed to go toward entertainment and luxury. Another mage mentioned that the ruler of that tower was at the 7th circle, while theirs was only at the 6th. But the bishop forbade him from ever touching that subject. The ruler was furious that his rival seemed to have bought up every stone in the area. Just then, the manager burst into his quarters. The bishop was indignant at being interrupted so rudely. But the man reported that a massive shipment of stones had just arrived. Everyone was stunned to hear this. Meanwhile, the mage was fighting Gislen. But Gislen didn't even flinch. He easily repelled every one of the mage's attacks. Then, a massive torrent of flames roared toward him. But Gislen cut that down with ease too. The onlookers were amazed by his skills, while the mage grew furious, unable to understand what kind of tricks these were. Suddenly, something started wrapping around him, without anyone noticing. Belinda had snuck up behind him, asking how he dared to attack her master. At that moment, the bishop arrived and demanded to know what kind of mess they'd made. He saw a guest binding his student and another drawing a sword. The girl looked alarmed when she saw him, and Gislen told Belinda to let the guy go. The mage, relieved to see the master, ran to him, whining that he'd been attacked. Trembling, he insisted that weak little Vanessa shouldn't be in the lab because she might get hurt. Belinda teased him, calling him a baby. Vanessa insisted she needed a laboratory. Gislen watched in silence for now. In the long run, Vanessa had been a total nightmare. He was surprised that a monster like her had gone through such hard times. The master was furious. Not only had they broken into his tower, but they'd also harmed his students. Belinda asked what they should do since they'd been threatened. Gislen apologized to the master for the late greeting and introduced himself as the heir of Berdium. He also mentioned he wanted to sell stones. Hearing this, the bishop was immediately taken aback. The student was just as shocked that Gislen had come to sell stones. Gislen said his men were outside guarding the goods. He invited the mages to take a look, and they all headed out. They were stunned by the sheer number of stones. The mages couldn't understand where the man had gotten so many. They asked what they should do with such goods. The master looked grim at first, but didn't answer. Finally, he beamed, saying it was simply a gift from the heavens. After all, with this, they could surpass the Crimson Tower once and for all. That's what he thought. But out loud, he claimed there wasn't much product and the quality was poor. Kaor was pissed that his loot was being looked down on. Vanessa said even a single cart would last them weeks. But the master told her to shut her mouth and get out of his sight, sneering that she only made life difficult for everyone. Gislen just watched as the ruler asked the mages if they agreed with him. The mages quickly agreed that, upon closer inspection, The stones didn't look very good. Belinda was indignant, saying they'd gone through hell to get those stones. But the mages asked why the difficulty of getting them should matter to them. Gislen assumed they wouldn't buy, so he told his people to pack up, confident they'd find other buyers. The master exchanged glances with his mages, then said they were still willing to take the lot. The master claimed that today, he was feeling generous and would buy all their goods. But Gislen cut him off, saying he didn't need his charity. He ordered Kaor to unload one cart for them and then move on. He added that they only intended to sell one cart anyway. The mages were left in a seriously awkward spot. Kaor chuckled, saying he'd completely forgotten about that, then told his people to get moving. When the master got indignant, Gislen replied that there had been a misunderstanding due to his subordinate's mistake. He explained they'd just stopped to earn some travel money, but were actually heading to the Crimson Tower. Hearing this, the master fumed, claiming they just wanted to vet the new provider. Gislen chuckled, and soon enough, they were sitting at the negotiation table. The master introduced him to the elders of his tower, all of whom had reached the 5th circle. Gislen replied that it was impressive, but he expected nothing less from the second-best tower in the north. The master said Gislen had probably heard rumors about them, but they were false. Belinda didn't understand why he had to provoke him again, but Gislen signaled her to trust him. The bishop decided to cut to the chase and discuss the price. Then, Gislen held up 2 fingers. He wanted double the market value. All the mages were outraged, shouting that he didn't know how things worked. The Lord told the kid that wasn't how you do business. But Gislen shot back that the tower itself was worth double the price. The mages were pissed off again at how insolent this guy was. The Lord turned to the kid calmly and told him, sternly, that he needed to watch his step, 'cause he was just a reckless kid. Gislen listened calmly and didn't say a word. The bishop went on, saying since the boy was young, they were willing to overlook his mistakes. When he offered to pay a little over market value, Gislen stood up, said he wasn't interested in the deal, and that they were just gonna leave. Then he turned his back, making the ruler nervous. He tried to stop the guy, reminding him he wasn't refusing to buy the stuff. Hearing the Lord was just panicking, Gislen chuckled. The rest watched quietly from the sidelines. In the end, the bishop agreed to buy it for double the price. And then Gislen looked satisfied, but he said sternly that was just for one cart. The bishop said they were ready to buy everything. Since they hadn't hauled it all there for nothing, Gislen said the Crimson Tower would agree to triple the price, so it'd be more profitable to head there. The Lord said Gislen had already tested his patience enough. Then Gislen started to walk away, but the Lord stopped him. The man shouted that he'd buy it at triple the price. That made Gislen smile. He was glad they could come to an understanding. The Lord told the kid to stay put while he went to get the money. Deep down, the man knew he held a high position. Yet, here he was, dancing to the kid's tune. Suddenly, Gislen said he hadn't listed all his conditions yet. Then the Lord started to lose his temper, and Gislen demanded they hand over Vanessa. Hearing that, the bishop was shocked by such a demand, and Gislen said it again, he wanted her to become his personal mage. One night, the men were sitting around the fire, roasting meat. One of them said it'd be better to do it himself rather than forcing the cripple to do it. The other guy got indignant at that, and his anger forced the first one to shut up. Suddenly, the man decided to ask Gislen about Vanessa. He asked if Gislen knew anything about her. There was an incident where the northern part of Lutania was burned down by a mage. Gislen thought the crimson disaster of the 7th circle sounded pretty impressive. The man said that at some point, the girl went completely crazy and started studying mana cultivation. Even though she was a mage, she'd been causing havoc and destroying the Lord's houses. And recently, there was even a request out for her. Hearing this, Gislen went silent. He suddenly realized she'd reached the 7th circle through cultivation. Not the traditional way. He thought that sounded tempting, and then suggested that Cloud recruit the girl. But it never happened because she didn't learn to control her magic. When they found her, she was barely alive. But she'd still managed to reach the 7th circle. This time, Gislen was determined to recruit her. All his companions thought the girl didn't look very strong. But the mages were willing to agree, because Vanessa was useless to them anyway. The Lord agreed. And Gislen added that they needed mages of the 3rd circle and above. That surprised the man. And Gislen went on to say that they'd soon have a territorial war. That made everyone tense up. Gislen demanded several more 3rd circle mages in addition to Vanessa. Everyone looked at the kid in surprise. And the Lord started getting furious. In that moment, he couldn't take the mockery anymore. The power radiating from him blew out the window glass. And he turned to the kid, asking if Gislen took him for a fool. After all, mages assigned to the tower didn't have the right to participate in territorial wars. Now he felt like Gislen had insulted his tower. Because of the pressure, all of Gislen's companions were ready to fight. However, Gislen stayed calm, stared right at the Lord, and told the man he'd regret it. He added that in his territory, there were 10 times more stones than what they'd brought. Hearing that, the mages were shocked. Gislen said this info had already spread all over the north. The man replied that those looking for easy money would soon flock to them. Gislen said they needed the tower's help to strengthen their position. The man was surprised when Gislen talked about custom deliveries for his tower, saying it was only a matter of time before the Crimson Tower took its place at the top. The Lord stared at the outstretched hand and made a face of disgust. But after weighing everything, he agreed with Gislen. Soon, he informed Alfoy that everything was decided. He told the boy he was sending him to lead the squad for the greater good. Hearing such praise, the kid was impressed. The Lord told Alfoy he'd definitely need that experience, and that he also had to make sure Gislen didn't trade those stones with anyone else. He asked the boy to be patient for just 1 year. For a while, Alfoy stayed silent. But later he came to an agreement with the bishop. Shortly after, though, he seemed to start regretting it. The moment he was welcomed into Verdium, the other mages assessed the castle. But Alfoy stayed quiet. He thought the place was just a dump, but he accepted it out of respect for the Lord. Alfoy called out to Gislen, and the kid replied that there'd be plenty of work for the mages. While Gislen looked around, Alfoy silently fumed that this villager treated him like a servant. Suddenly, Gislen turned to Alfoy and asked where Vanessa was. The guy said she was probably somewhere in the back with the luggage. Just then, a girl appeared carrying several suitcases. She looked exhausted from the trip, almost collapsing in front of Gislen. She greeted the boy. But when Alfoy complained that she was too slow, Gislen frowned. Then Gislen told her to drop everything and come with him. Alfoy told Gislen to leave it be, since she was used to that kind of work. Before he could finish speaking, a suitcase flew right into his face. He fell to the ground under its weight. Alfoy asked, indignant, what the hell Gislen was doing. Then the kid replied that Vanessa didn't belong to the latrines anymore. She belonged to Gislen's people. He was willing to turn a blind eye this time, but he forbade anyone from bothering Vanessa again. Vanessa felt awkward watching this unfold. Alfoy, on the other hand, was fuming at the disrespect. He demanded to know how Gislen dared treat a tower heir, even a third-rate one, like trash. He thought the noble had crossed a line and looked ready to throw hands. Gislen just clicked his tongue in disgust and snapped his fingers. Instantly, every mercenary drew their weapon. The mages were outraged that these savages were pointing steel at them. But Gislen told the kid to shut his mouth. They had a contract, which meant Gislen owned him. Alfoy was furious, but he couldn't say a damn thing. Gislen told him respect had to be earned, calling him nothing but a spare part. That stung. As he walked out, Gislen told his men to show the kid the ropes. Kaor chuckled, saying, bet life was a whole lot softer back in the tower. Staring down two massive mercenaries. Alfoy froze in fear. Vanessa just watched from the sidelines. barely reacting. Then Gislen walked up to her. He told her flat out, "Don't take orders from anyone else. Your time's my time's mage now." Vanessa flushed, feeling embarrassed. And she looked away, reminded of the painful fact that she couldn't actually cast magic. Gislen gave a faint smile and told her to follow him. He promised to unlock her potential. They arrived at the training grounds. She looked around blankly until Gislen turned to face her. He asked how deep her theoretical knowledge went. Turns out, she'd studied up to the 5th circle. Even Gislen was impressed. Vanessa stared at him quietly before muttering, "I can't use spells anyway." Gislen asked why. She explained she hadn't. Is felt mana since she was a child. Yet she studied every single day without rest. Eventually, her master died. She believed that was the real reason she got kicked out. Gislen stayed silent. The 5th circle. That was power comparable to the tower elders themselves. Magic wasn't just memorizing formulas. You had to understand the principles. Vanessa understood it all. But her body just couldn't keep up with her mind. But her efforts weren't wasted. She just needed a different path. He recalled what Cloud had said about her. That guy thought she was just crazy. But Gislen had a different idea. He wanted to teach her mana cultivation. Her eyes went wide when she heard that. She didn't get why she needed cultivation. But Gislen explained that everything was connected, and she hadn't even tried that approach yet. Suddenly, she panicked, saying that kind of magic was insanity. But Gislen just asked her to try. Just once. Their eyes met. Vanessa considered his offer, wondering. Asterisk. Could I really do magic times? She clenched her fist. Up until now, she had nothing to show for her life. Gislen recognized those eyes. In his past life, she had the same look full of regret, rage, and hatred. She had fought so hard for magic back then, but it only dragged her into the abyss. But now, Gislen knew how to fix it. He wouldn't let her fall this time. He was going to save her. Gislen began transferring his mana into Vanessa. She felt a sudden heat spreading through her. "Don't open your mouth," he warned. "You'll break the mana flow." "My mana is inside you now," he said. "Don't lose that sensation." He guided her, telling her to focus everything on that feeling. A surge of mana rushed through Vanessa, reaching every corner of her body before circling back to her core. The room exploded with bright light. Suddenly, a memory hit Vanessa. Her master defending her, insisting she had talent. But the Lord replying that she was missing something vital. What kind of mage can't cast magic, he had sneered. The bishop had said investing in her was pointless. Vanessa saw her younger self. And then, to another memory with her master surfaced. She had cried, thinking her lack of talent forced her master to leave the tower. But the professor had smiled, claiming she was just going on a trip, telling Vanessa not to worry. No darkness lasts forever, she had said. Her master promised that one day, the light would find her. And that light turned out to be Gislen. Her master was right. Someone had finally reached out a hand to her. Finally. She had her own ray of sun. Meanwhile, a commotion broke out in a nearby tavern. A brawl between travelers. One guy was provoking the others, itching for a fight. They took the bait and rushed him. But the warrior easily dodged their blades, grabbed one guy, and slammed him into the floor. Another attacked from behind. But he sensed it. He tossed the first guy aside like a rag doll and instantly took down the second attacker. They hit the wall so hard they smashed right through it. The warrior chuckled. "Ha, I haven't even warmed up yet." The others laughed, annoyed that these worms were interrupting their drinking. They all agreed nobody here could stop them. Outside, another one of their crew was fishing. They asked if his training went well, but he just demanded the essentials. Then the man dropped the news orders from Desmond. Sam went silent. He grabbed his helmet, slid it on, and prepared to move out. It was getting boring here anyway, he muttered. Meanwhile, Back in the Verdium lands, the news had arrived. Gislen's father was grim. A letter had arrived. Gislen had killed Gilmore of the Grad family, and they were coming for blood. He ordered the soldiers to mobilize. Furious at the accusation, everyone knew the Grads were just looking for an excuse to start a war. But the Lord tried to keep up appearances. Suddenly, the word came that they were demanding the stone. Gislen was sure the vassals had leaked the intel. The others were outraged at the betrayal. The Lord mused that, sometimes, doing what's best for the land leads to ruin. But Gislen, he seemed to expect this. A knight spoke up, claiming they had more troops and territory than the Grads. But then, the doors burst open. Escoban rushed in with bad news. The enemy? They're already here. At that moment, someone was approaching their castle, and Sam led the way. As they scaled the wall, everyone saw the enemy army. The lords thought it was a setup, since the enemy appeared right after the declaration of war. Then they reported on the physician, number of troops and weapons. But the difference in strength was so massive that everyone started to panic. That's when Lord Verdium told them all to get a grip. He said all this arguing was just wasting time they needed for defense. The civilians were evacuated immediately. Then he had to announce that the war had begun. As he approached the castle, the man was humming a tune. He said his son had no talent, but his death allowed this war to start. Count Grad was impressed by the castle and suggested Sam go ahead and discuss something with Verdium. Then Verdium turned to his brother and asked what was going on. But Grad simply said his son was killed on this soil. And not only that, he was killed by Verdium's own son. He offered Verdium a chance to surrender so there wouldn't be any bloodshed. Gislen watched in silence. At that moment, the lords were outraged by what was happening. Gislen understood he couldn't avoid this outcome. And since they brought siege weapons, they clearly wanted to wipe them out. Suddenly, he heard his father defending his son. And that was Verdium's final answer. The tone caught Grad off guard for a moment. Sam was impressed that the great general left such an impact. Grad didn't expect anything less from the Wolf of the North. Then he turned around and told Verdium not to regret this. Standing on the wall, everyone listened to Grad's distant laughter. Then the knight asked to be given command. But others talked them out of fighting because the gap in power was too great. The lords were causing a scene. But Verdium remained silent. The chaos clouded his thoughts. Suddenly, the war began. And the enemy turned out to be prepared. He didn't understand what to do now. Then Gislen said to get ready for a siege. His father looked at him in surprise. Gislen said the difference in strength was more than double. And when the siege weapon is ready, the enemy will attack with full force. Gislen said the best move was to call for help and hold the line. His father said even if that were the case, it wasn't clear what to do next. This made Gislen chuckle slightly. And he whispered something to his father. He didn't answer, just looked at his son in surprise. Gislen was betting everything that the situation would change radically. He decided to discuss what to do with his people. However, Jillian was out of ideas. Kaor was also lost in thought. And Belinda couldn't believe the war had actually started. So, Gislen decided to give the orders himself. Gislen decided to attack the enemy's supplies before it was too late. But Belinda asked how, since too many eyes were fixed on the castle. Then, Gislen turned to Kaor and Jillian. Kaor said that, just as Gislen requested, they had stationed troops in the forest in advance, and the Enderist bark cloaks were ready. Gislen said that small, camouflaged units could carry out sabotage easily. But he told Belinda they didn't know where the supplies were kept, and he wanted her to locate them. The girl was taken aback by the task, but she accepted almost immediately. Infiltrating enemy lines was dangerous, but Gislen believed Belinda could handle it. Now they only had one small thing left to do: play the trump card that would end the war. A few days later, the people of Grad were rejoicing over the start of the war. The camp where the supplies were kept was located in the rear, and the commanders were pleased with their position. One of them was happy that he'd soon get a piece of those lands. Then someone started approaching the camp, arriving just in time. Everyone noticed it was foggy and you couldn't see a thing. Gislen agreed that conditions were perfect for their attack. He ordered them to take no prisoners and kill everyone. Soon, the sound of footsteps came from the forest. Before the guards had time to react, riders were upon them, and they were cut down instantly. The remaining soldiers in the camp immediately readied for battle. But before they could do anything, they were slaughtered. Then Gislen shouted again that they shouldn't show any mercy to their opponents. Then the Baron was informed they were under attack. The Baron said not to worry because they had 1,000 fighters. However, the other man felt disheartened by those words. In fact, half of them had already been killed. Gislen's squad treated the enemy without mercy. This made the man tense up. After thinking for a moment, he decided to make a run for it, but then his companion was attacked. Terrified, the man hit the dirt. Belinda immediately recognized Pablo's vassal. The vassal was terrified when he saw the girl. Soon everything was up in flames, and the vassal was tied up. Belinda reported that Pablo not only leaked the intel but also led the squad. Then the man started begging for mercy. Gislen asked who bribed him. The man immediately said it was Desmond, but that he had also threatened him. Then, Gislen was convinced that Desmond had sold out the army to the Grads. Meanwhile, the man kept trying to curry favor with Gislen. Dismounting his horse, Gislen told him to raise his head. The man felt relieved and thanked him for the chance, but without saying a word, Gislen sliced his head off. The man didn't even have time to process what happened, and Gislen refused to make any deals. After all, he believed traitors deserve nothing but death. After torching the enemy camp, they prepared to head back. Belinda looked at Gislen, and Kaor asked what was next. Gislen ordered them to return to the castle. After all, the enemy had likely already started to attack them, and if they struck from the rear, they would break the formation and cause chaos. He gave the left flank to Kaor and Belinda and took the right for himself. Then he turned to Gislen and entrusted him with the enemy base. The man agreed to handle it solo without any problem. Belinda asked who would take charge of the main gate, but Gislen told her to forget about it. No one understood his answer. Then he turned silently to his companions and smiled, and he said this war would open a new chapter in history. Lord Berdium ordered us to prepare for the attack. The crossbowmen rushed to the ramparts and tried to shoot down the enemy, but they'd already scaled the walls. There were just too many of them, so it turned into an all-out melee. As the battle raged on, de Grad was actually enjoying the show. He figured the outcome of the battle was already decided, so he ordered a second volley from the catapults. Sam was convinced this was the end of the line for the North. He'd had his doubts at first, but watching it now, it was obvious. Lord Berdium had nowhere left to run. Then someone shouted that the gates were about to give, but the Lord told them to forget the gates and hold the wall. Azkaban reported that no reinforcements were coming, since they had their own problems to deal with. It was a pity no one was willing to back them up. Suddenly, a report came in for de Grad. The soldiers said they were out of supplies. The supply unit hadn't returned, so they assumed something went wrong. De Grad was shocked that Berdium managed to locate their supply camp. Plus, there was smoke rising from the camp, and Sam realized Berdium had a strategist on their side. That actually piqued his interest. De Grad asked what they should do without supplies, but Sam just patted his cheek and said they didn't need supplies anymore. De Grad was stunned when he said the castle would be theirs by sundown. Sam turned silently toward the castle. He was a veteran. He knew how to win. The flank attack had already begun. The walls were holding, but the central gates were left unguarded. Suddenly, it all clicked, and he ordered an all-out assault. He ordered them to breach the central gate. He stood there for a moment, then called over one of his fighters. When Idun stepped up, Sam told him he could probably break through on his own, but that they should have stayed to hold the position. Meanwhile, they kept scaling the walls, but Berdium's forces kept slaughtering them. Then Escoban shouted a warning to the Lord. Siege towers were heading straight for them. Unfortunately, the towers were the exact same height as the walls. Berdium ordered the catapults ready. They had just finished setting them up. They opened fire immediately to stop the towers from reaching the walls. The enemy was shocked to see metal projectiles, but before it could hit, someone shot it down. Berdium was stunned. They didn't recognize him at first. But then Berdium saw the rider. He couldn't believe his eyes. It was Sam standing right there. Sam declared that Berdium's fall was inevitable. Then he ordered the battering ram forward, aiming straight for the gate. After scaling the siege towers, warriors stormed the castle walls. In the heat of battle, Berdium began to pin his hopes on Gislen. Soldiers were guarding the gate. Meanwhile, the mages were tied up. Alfoy screamed at them to untie him. He didn't want to die. But the knight told them to stay put. Alfoy argued that letting the ram get that close was suicide. Despite his screaming, Vanessa remained calm. She told him not to worry, promising that Gislen had it under control. But Alfoy didn't buy it. He told her not to even mention that idiot's name. The more she tried to soothe him, the angrier he got. Vanessa calmly insisted that they could trust Gislen. He'd taught her some magic a couple of days ago. Though she hadn't managed much, Vanessa had felt embarrassed and apologized. But Gislen encouraged her. Then he called her outside to show her something. There was construction work going on. Vanessa didn't understand why they were burying a runestone. Suddenly, Alfoy walked up and asked why Gislen was making them dig. Then Gordon stepped in, telling the kid to quit yapping and get back to work. Vanessa was surprised by all this. But Gislen told her it was all part of the prep. He knew the gates would fall during the battle. But he also knew they could still win. Vanessa listened, confused, until she realized what Gislen was planning. She wasn't sure if she could actually pull it off. But Gislen had high hopes for her.